Chapter 1975. What Zhang Yan thought of was that the two of them were born from stubbornness, and they both landed in the most unstable areas of their cultivation. This was not a coincidence, because only the weakest parts of their cultivation could be easily broken through by stubbornness. From this, he also thought that the Taoist was not only a trial for cultivators, but also a process to make up for their weaknesses. For those who sought for themselves, because they focused on themselves, they used their willpower to push their cultivation. During this process, they would naturally conform to the great Tao, and the change of the Taoist came about because of this. This was not an obstacle for cultivators in their cultivation, but a cultivator's own desire. For those who did not seek to improve, or tried to suppress their own cultivation, they would never encounter this trial. And where were his weaknesses? Compared to his peers, his state of mind and mana could be said to be flawless. However, there was nothing perfect in the world, so there must be a shortcoming to be found. He pondered for a while and thought of something. Whether it was Taoist Shenchang, Qing Sheng, or Chao Ying, all of them were seeking one of the two Taoist paths outside of themselves. He was the only one who sought for both paths, or in other words, he did not care about the two sides of the path. He did not know if anyone had done this before, but now, it was obvious that he was the only one who cultivated like this. Since there was no other Tao technique that he could use as a reference, there must be a flaw in the integration. This required him to constantly deduce and perfect it as he moved forward. However, this was obviously a shortcoming here. Therefore, the Taoist was likely to come from his own Tao technique, and he might encounter a more complicated situation. He did not regret this, because once this path was taken by him, he would be able to go further than anyone else in the same generation. After thinking about all these, he roughly sorted out the matter and had a clear idea in his mind. Next, he only needed to raise his cultivation and slowly deduce the changes. When the Taoist arrived, he just needed to find a way to kill it. With his mind set, he sank his consciousness into Bushutian. After an unknown amount of time, just as he was about to reach the real trial, he suddenly felt a sense of danger. He immediately withdrew his consciousness and opened his eyes. He saw a Taoist in a gray Taoist robe in front of him. The Taoist looked ragged and had no facial features. His body was hard to distinguish, as if half of it was reflected in the void. His eyes flickered slightly. Putting aside the fact that the other party did not trigger any waves of mana, there were no signs of it either. It was enough to show that his cultivation was superb. What was even more amazing was that the moment this person stood there, the large amount of mana that was pouring in from the outside no longer existed. It looked as though it was being pushed away by him. He shook his sleeves, stood up, and said, "May I know who you are? What are you here for?" The faceless Taoist didn't say anything. He just transmitted a thought and said, "I hope you can stop cultivating." However, there's still the enlightenment stage. Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows. Given his level of attainment, someone with a high level of attainment would be able to sense it from the ripples of mana. For example, when he met Qing Sheng, the latter was able to sense his intentions. However, from the looks of it, this person seemed to have known about this beforehand. If that was the case, perhaps this person had been paying attention to him since a long time ago. He looked over and said, "Since you want I to do this, can you tell me the reason?" The faceless Taoist was silent for a moment before he transmitted his thoughts. "You should know the person who has harmed everyone." Zhang Yan nodded slightly. The faceless Taoist continued, "The higher the cultivator's cultivation, the higher the possibility of this person appearing. If you succeed, it's very likely that this existence will come earlier. Therefore, you need to stop cultivating so that you can protect your fellow Taoists." When Zhang Yan heard this, he couldn't help but laugh. "As far as I know, there is more than one person in the void who has a higher cultivation than me. If you think that the higher the cultivation, the more hindrance it is, then why don't you look for others, but I? Isn't this putting the cart before the horse?" The faceless Taoist did not answer this question. He only said, "I only want to know if you are willing to stop." Zhang Yan's eyes were slightly cold. According to what the person said, if he improved his cultivation, it would attract this existence. However, if he did not improve his cultivation as much as possible to control Bu Su Tian as soon as possible, when this existence really appeared, he would not be able to resist. The faceless Taoist's request was to use his own interests to fulfill the others. Not to mention that if this person was able to tell him the exact reason, then perhaps he would be able to consider it and find a suitable method, and he might even be able to see a trace of the profundities of the Grand Tao through this. But now, it was absolutely impossible for him to stop with just a few words. He looked over and said lightly, "Please forgive me for not being able to agree to your request." The faceless Taoist said, "If you are not willing, then I have to stop you." Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, "I will wait here." The faceless Taoist did not choose to make a move. Instead, his body slowly drifted away and disappeared. Zhang Yan looked at the place where the figure disappeared and his eyes narrowed. He knew that it was not that this person was avoiding the battle, but that the battle had already begun. This person's method was extremely clever. Just after he arrived, he had completely blocked out all external senses, and he could no longer sense the mana of other people of the same generation. Until now, it was as if he was the only one left in the entire void. It was very likely that this was not just blocking him alone. People like Xinchang Taoist and the others certainly could not sense him, otherwise they would definitely come to help. Whether it was Chao Ying or Qing Sheng, they had never shown such magical power. This was enough to show that this person's cultivation was extremely high, perhaps beyond any of the people of the same generation that he had met before. This person did not attack him now, not because he was waiting for him to change his mind, but because he wanted to avoid a head-on fight with him. He believed that as long as he continued to understand the Jiezhen Pass, this person would definitely come to disturb him. It was clear that this person was not letting him focus on his cultivation. The most dangerous thing was that because he had blocked out his mana, he did not know where this person was. Therefore, it was difficult for him to even initiate a fight. In reality, if he was disturbed during the battle with Wan Zhen and lost, it would not stop him from improving his cultivation. This was because no matter if he won or Wan Zhen won, they would still pass this pass. The reason why this person did this was to prevent him from taking this step. This was because no cultivator would be willing to be replaced by Wan Zhen. This was also the reason why this person showed up in advance to give him pressure. Otherwise, he could have attacked him when he was about to kill Wan Zhen. He thought about it carefully and realized that this person had indeed grasped the key point. Unless he could hide in Bu Su now, he would not be able to completely ignore this person's threat. However, there was one thing that this person did not expect. Although the past Wan Zhen was in danger, it might not be the same for him. He had an advantage that others did not have, and that was the broken jade. Once he had a specific direction, he could deduce in advance. If he failed once, he could deduce twice, and if he failed twice, he could deduce thrice until he found a way to kill Wan Zhen. However, if he did not discuss Dao with Shen Chang, Zhan Yuan, and even Qing Sheng, he would not be able to find the right path so quickly. However, if he did not have a deep understanding of Dao, even if he knew all these, it would not be of much use. Both were indispensable. Once he found a way to kill Wan Zhen, as long as he remained calm and was not disturbed, the faceless Daoist would not be able to do anything unless the faceless Daoist was willing to fight him face to face. Now that he had the Bu Su Weili and a few ultimate treasures, he was not afraid. He immediately sat down, sank his mind, and entered the broken jade. In a place where it was hard to see, the faceless Daoist was watching Zhang Yan's every move, but he did not come out to disturb him. This was because he could sense that Zhang Yan's qi was very stable, which meant that he was not comprehending Dao, but was simply sitting still. He would only take action when Zhang Yan showed signs of breaking through the barrier of truth. Zhang Yan repeatedly deduced in the broken jade. After a long time, his mind withdrew. At this moment, there was a strange light in his eyes. He had found the way to break through the barrier of truth. With his current realm, as long as he found it once, he could completely deduce it without any mistakes. However, in his deduction just now, he realized that he didn't have to deal with one stubborn being, but two. Of course, they did not appear at the same time. Just now, after killing one, he would encounter the other one. However, what puzzled him was that the Wanzhen was transformed from the marks of existence. Logically speaking, there should only be one, so where did the second one come from? He pondered for a moment and said, could it be because of the predecessor? This was very likely, but he thought that there was another possibility, which was that it came from the body of strength. Because the Wanzhen was transformed from two marks of existence, it meant that he had two shortcomings at the moment. One was from the Tao, which was no doubt, and the other was most likely from the body of strength. However, whether this was the case or not, it was still impossible to verify. He was afraid that he could only wait until his body of strength reached this level. Just now, it was possible to know the truth. However, with this method, he had already made up his mind, but now he needed to test it to see how it would react if he did so just now. Therefore, he sank his mind and tried to comprehend the Tao. At first, there was no movement. However, as he gradually went deeper, he suddenly felt a boundless magical power attacking him from the outside. He knew clearly that with his opponent's ability, he could totally do it without making a sound. However, he just had to make such a huge commotion. That meant that the opponent was trying to disturb him. He immediately responded by spreading his mana outwards, and at the same time, the Tai golden beads suddenly flew out and crashed into the opponent's mana. However, with just a slight contact, before he could determine the strength, the opponent's mana disappeared without a trace, as if his power had landed on thin air. He retracted his mana and continued to look like he was comprehending, but the mana quickly returned, so he stopped again. Every time he started, the opponent would definitely come to disturb him. In short, he would not be able to calm down. After trying many times, he knew that as long as he grasped the right opportunity, he could kill the Wanzhen before the opponent could make a move. Once this was over, it would be time to deal with the opponent. Chapter 1976. After that person's fatally retreated once again, Zhang Yan knew that there would be a period of time before that person hit himself and attacked again. If that was the case, then there would be a period of time that he could make use of before that. However, this did not rule out the possibility that the opponent deliberately exposed this flaw to wait for him to fall in. Therefore, before he killed Wanzhen, he still had to do the necessary preparations. After a little preparation, his mind focused on the inside. As he moved, the qi on his body immediately became deep and serene. The faceless Taoist immediately sensed that something was wrong, and his mana surged out from the void. However, when it came to Zhang Yan's side, he saw light flashing on his body. The treasure cup and the golden bell jumped out at the same time, and the mana that attacked him was either retreated or swallowed. However, after a pause, the mana ignored the two magic treasures as if they were nothing. It passed by them and directly pressed down on him. When Zhang Yan saw this scene, he couldn't help but think. He faintly sensed something. However, the most important thing now was to kill Wanzhen, and it wasn't the time to pay attention to these things. Moreover, no matter how formidable that person's mana was, he was still delayed for a moment just now, and that gave him a chance. If it was someone else, who would dare to kill Wanzhen under such a threat? However, after repeated deductions, he already knew the changes. This moment of stability was enough for him. He immediately sent his consciousness into Busu Tian. In the midst of the chaos, as his cultivation advanced, there was a moment when he suddenly felt a blur in his consciousness. A figure that was exactly the same as him suddenly appeared. Seeing this, he knew that the fate law had arrived. Because he had prepared well in advance, Wanzhen was inferior to him in both Tao and mana. Therefore, there was no need for any fancy tricks, and he only needed to use all his mana to crash into it. In an instant, the two mana collided in this divine will. After all, Wanzhen had the same means as him. Even though he was at a disadvantage, he was still well prepared, and there was no sign of confusion. He even had the strength to fight back. However, he had this slight advantage. As the battle progressed, he could accumulate this advantage bit by bit until it could be infinitely magnified. Unless something went wrong, there was no way he could turn the tables. However, this was almost impossible. Not to mention that there had already been countless deductions in the remnant jade. Even if there had not been, there would not have been such negligence. But even so, it wasn't easy for him to win. After fighting with Wang Zhen for tens of thousands of years, he finally succeeded in killing him. However, he did not retreat from the divine will and continued to wait with rapt attention. Moments later, another naughty Zhen appeared. This stubbornness was not something that he could completely predict in advance. The appearance of this spirit was also reflected by the aura in his spirit. It could be said that it was no different from his current state. Here, he did not have an advantage in terms of dermic powers and Dao techniques. However, there was one thing that Wang Zhen did not have. That was because through deduction, he knew exactly when Wang Zhen would come out. Therefore, he could seize the initiative. When two people with the same means and divine powers fought, the one who seized the initiative would definitely have the upper hand. As long as this situation could be maintained, the possibility of defeating the enemy would not be small. This was actually the method that Taoist Zhang Yuan used to kill Wang Zhen. However, he did not know when Wang Zhen would come out, so he had been discharging his dermic powers in the divine will. This method seemed simple, but it was not easy to do because it could not be disturbed by any external forces. In case of an enemy attack, when he sank into the divine will again, Wang Zhen might be waiting for him there. Fortunately, Taoist Zhang Yuan had Taoist Xinchang to protect him at that time, so he was unharmed. Because of this, the two of them could entrust each other as allies. However, there was still a great deal of luck involved. This time, Zhang Yan found out through his divination, especially from the moment he killed the first Wang Zhen to the end. Nothing could be different from what he had predicted, or else the result would be different. Fortunately, everything went according to his plan. This time, the two sides fought for a longer time. Both sides had endless dermic powers. In the end, it was impossible to calculate how long it took. Zhang Yan finally killed Wang Zhen by relying on his advantage of being the first to kill him. Once he had settled down, his mind immediately withdrew from it. No matter how long the battle in the divine will lasted, it would only take a moment in the outside world. However, this moment was already a different world. At this moment, the attacking Wang Zhen's dermic powers were just now in front of him. His eyes flashed, and his mind changed. The dermic powers around his body surged, and he rushed forward. In the faceless Taoist senses, Zhang Yan's qi activity suddenly surged. Whether it was his Dao or dermic powers, they were all greatly improved. After killing Wang Zhen, he made up for his shortcomings, which led to this change. As soon as he sensed the flow of qi, he instantly knew that Zhang Yan had used some unknown method to pass the barrier of unraveling truth, and he'd come here today precisely to stop this. But now that Zhang Yan had succeeded, there was no point in staying here any longer. So he circulated his magic energy, and it vanished like a receding tide. Seeing this, Zhang Yan circulated his dermic powers, and a clear light suddenly appeared in his eyes, illuminating the silence. At this moment, he was very different from just now. He could faintly sense the existence of his opponent. At this time, when he looked carefully, he saw a shadow. He would not be polite, and with a thought, the tiny golden bead came crashing down. After being hit, the faceless Taoist's dermic powers fluctuated, and he was forced to retreat from the illusion. But when the tiny golden bead came crashing down again, the treasure actually passed through his body. Just now, after seeing the faceless Taoist's skills, Zhang Yan knew that the dermic treasures were probably useless against him. But he already knew that the tiny golden bead this time was only to restrain the faceless Taoist, not to defeat the enemy. Seeing this, he immediately used a backup plan. With a thought, Bushutian's Weili was immediately activated, and it came crashing down. The faceless Taoist originally wanted to disappear, but this time he could not escape. The Bushutian's Weili could not be pushed away, and he was trapped inside. The faceless Taoist was a little surprised, but he also knew that he could not escape, so he simply did not struggle. He looked up at Zhang Yan, and said, "After you pass through this pass, that person will come soon. What can you do to stop him?" Zhang Yan smiled faintly, and said, "If this person comes, how do you know that he will destroy me, and not me?" As soon as he said this, Xian Qi fluttered behind him, and then a steady stream of Weili surged up. After passing through the Enlightenment Pass, he felt that it was easier to control the Bushutian's Weili. Although the faceless Taoist in front of him was not a treasure spirit and could not be swallowed, he could trap him here and not let him escape. But at this time, he found a trace of strangeness. Under the pressure of the Bushutian's Weili, the faceless Taoist's figure gradually faded, and his magic power gradually disappeared. Finally, his whole body slowly drifted away, leaving only a broken mask floating in the air. Zhang Yan's gaze became slightly gloomy. He stretched out his hand and took the mask. After looking at it for a moment, he was able to determine that this person wasn't a true cultivator, and it was probably a great figure that had placed his will on this item. The reason why this person was able to manifest and go against him was because of this item. Perhaps this thing had something to do with the essence of creation. Now that it had been soaked in the Bushutian's Weili, and since it had failed to stop him, its obsession had disappeared. With the defeat of the faceless Taoist, the surrounding magic power fluctuations became clear again. Zhang Yan put away the mask and looked around. He saw that boy Xinchang was still there, but he was sleeping soundly, as if he had not noticed what had happened just now. After a few breaths, two familiar magic powers appeared. Then, Taoist Xinchang and Taoist Zhang Yuan appeared. Taoist Zhang Yuan looked around, cupped his hands, and said, "Fellow Taoist, just now, I saw that your magic power was blocked for a moment. May I know why?" Zhang Yan replied, "Just now, while I was cultivating, someone came to disturb me." What you two felt was the doing of that person. He briefly explained what had happened just now. Taoist Xinchang's expression became solemn. He said, "If it is as you said, and this person is only a wisp of obsession, then it is very likely that his cultivation is superior to ours." Taoist Zhang Yuan pondered for a moment and said, "This person did not come with his real body. Perhaps there are some restrictions, or perhaps he has entered eternal silence, and only this obsession remains in the silence." Taoist Xinchang seemed to have thought of something. He pondered for a while, then raised his head just now and said, "That person said that when fellow Taoist Zhang's magic power has improved, that existence will be attracted. Perhaps it is not directed at you alone, but this person's obsession is different from ours." Zhang Yan asked, "Why do you say that?" Taoist Xinchang said, "Some people once thought that because of the improvement of our cultivation, that existence pointed to the Great Way and touched the nameless, and just now, it has been attracted. If all the spirit refinement remains as it is now, and there is no change in our cultivation, then this person will not appear." He paused for a moment and said, "I noticed that there is something wrong with your qi. Have you already passed the Jianjin test?" Zhang Yan nodded and said, "After talking with you, I gained some enlightenment and was able to pass this test." Although Taoist Xinchang had already guessed it, he could not help but be shocked, because Zhang Yan had obviously killed Wanzhen under the threat of an external enemy. Such ability was really amazing. He calmed his emotions slightly before he said, "No wonder that person came looking for you. With fellow Daoist's ability, you might really be able to find the door of the Grand Tao. In that way, it would be extremely easy to draw that existence over." Zhang Yan shook his head in his heart. According to his thinking, if one encountered a powerful enemy, one should find a way to deal with it. Even if one avoided it, it was only to temporarily protect oneself, and in the long run, the goal was to destroy the enemy. Now, this person actually thought that the only way to avoid the enemy was to restrain his own cultivation. Not only did he do so, but he also used his cultivation to obstruct the path of others. He was the most stubborn and conservative Taoist cultivator he had ever met. Taoist Xinchang reminded, "Don't be careless, my friend. This person will not stop until he achieves his goal. Although this time, the spiritual imprint was destroyed by you, it is not certain that no one will come." Zhang Yan nodded. Now that he had passed the Jianjin test, he could open up the world stoppage and conceal his mana. In this way, it would not be easy for the opponent to find him. Moreover, in the world stoppage, his defense would be better than before. Even if that person came looking for him, he would not be able to do anything to him. Chapter 1977. Xinchang and Zhang Yuan discussed with Zhang Yan for a while. They believed that they still needed to guard against this person's return. However, this person had the ability to conceal his mana, which was tantamount to cutting off the possibility of them joining forces. If this person still had lingering thoughts in the void, then the next time he came, it would not be Zhang Yan, but the two of them. In that case, they might not be able to resist. Therefore, they needed a way to break this restraint, but they also had to be able to fight back. Zhang Yan thought for a while and came up with an idea. He opened his palm and pulled out 2 strands of bush tian wei that he had refined. They turned into 2 jade talisman and said, "The two of you can carry these things with you. If this person comes again, I can use them to help you." As long as Xinchang and Zhai Yuan had this thing with them, he would be able to track them down without needing to sense their qi activity or mana. Even if the enemy tried to isolate them, it would be useless. And with these things, if this person sent more lingering thoughts to this place, he would not be able to do anything to them. This was because the treasure of lingering thoughts was usually related to the essence of creation. If it did not belong to this category, there was usually no way to carry the consciousness of the spirit refinement almighty. But just now Dozhan had proved that this kind of thing alone could be easily restrained by the bush tian wei. The only thing to worry about was that the opponent was coming. But the bush tian wei itself was endless, so even if there was only 1 strand of wei with them, they could use it to attract more. But he still needed to do it himself. Xinchang and Zhang Yuan did not know what it was, but seeing that Zhang Yan did not explain, they did not ask any more questions and took the jade beads. Seeing that there was nothing left to do here, the two of them thanked him and bade farewell. Taoist Xinchang, however, was a step behind Taoist Zhang Yuan. After the latter left, he turned around and said, "Fellow Taoist, I've just now done some calculations in my mind, and there are indeed signs of that existence appearing a little earlier than expected. That faceless Taoist's words are not entirely nonsense. Don't be careless, fellow Taoist." With that, he cupped his hands and left. Zhang Yan's eyes were deep and serene. He knew that faceless Taoist's words could not be nonsense, because after he confirmed it, it already had some kind of truth. What's more, Xinchang Taoist and the others had chosen to believe it to a certain extent, at least they did not completely deny it. As a result, even if this wasn't the case in the beginning, as more and more alchemists started to believe in it, it would slowly turn into the truth, and this in turn would push this matter forward. Just like now. Previously, he was unable to detect that existence, but now he could vaguely sense it. This was probably not only because of the improvement of his cultivation, but also because his fellow Taoists believed so, which made this statement one step further into the truth. Unless he had a way to reverse the perception of all his peers, he could not change this situation. But if he had such an ability, he would not have to worry about this person. He thought about it carefully. According to faceless Taoist's words, the higher one's cultivation, the easier it would be to attract that existence. Therefore, the most reasonable situation should be that the existence would not allow anyone with a higher cultivation to appear. Otherwise, it would be meaningless for the existence to come out. And when a cultivator's cultivation gradually approached that existence, it might be the time for the existence to come out. But no matter what, since he could not stop this person from coming, he could only choose to face it. It was absolutely wrong to retreat and be conservative, for it would be equivalent to giving the opponent the right to choose. While he was thinking, he felt waves of magic power, and knew that more guests had arrived. He looked up and saw 2 Taoists coming together. It was Taoist Quan Dao and Taoist Zhang Yuan. These two were originally comprehending the Great Tao, but suddenly noticed that Zhang Yan's magic power was fading and hiding, and immediately realized that this was a sign of the past stubbornness. At this moment, the two were also threatened by that existence. After learning of Bushutian's existence, they very much wanted to seek protection from him. But looking at Zhang Yan's situation, it was obvious that he was coming down to open up the world. If they did not see him now, it would be very difficult to find him after he succeeded, so they hurriedly came to find him. The Taoist standing on the left came up and said, "I would like to congratulate fellow Taoist for passing the test of understanding the truth." In the past, they were very reserved in front of Zhang Yan, but now that the latter's cultivation was higher than theirs, their attitude changed. Zhang Yan smiled and bowed. Then, he said, "Why did the two of you come back to look for me?" The Taoist on the right was silent for a while, then said frankly, "We will not hide it from fellow Taoist. Because of the threat from that existence, we have been looking for a way out, but until now we have not found such a place. Later, we vaguely heard from other places that there seems to be a place where you can seek protection. Now that I have come to see fellow Taoist, I want to ask, if that existence comes, can you let us in to hide?" The Taoist on the left said, "If fellow Taoist agrees, we can hand over the good fortune fragments in our hands to fellow Taoist." Zhang Yan thought about it. He did not care much about the good fortune fragments, but in the future, he would have to face that existence, so the more allies he had, the better. But the premise was that he could control Bushutian, so before he achieved this goal, he would not let anyone in. Thus, he said, "I cannot promise the two of you now, but when the time comes, I will give you an accurate answer." When the two heard this, they were happy. Zhang Yan's spiritual power was now above theirs, so even if he rejected them, they could not do anything. It was already good to have such a reply, so they immediately bowed and thanked him. At this moment, Zhang Yan thought of something. Seeing the two of them here, he asked, "Do the two of you know where Yahan and the others went?" The Taoist on the left said, "We have our suspicions as well. We have been keeping an eye on him, but he suddenly disappeared without a trace. We privately speculate that he has gone to some place, but we can't deduce anything at the moment. If it's not that he has the protection of a highly skilled Taoist, then he is hiding in some world." Zhang Yan nodded, this was in line with his speculation. He said, "I still have things to do here, so I will not keep you too." When the two of them saw this, they tactfully cupped their fists and left. After sending the two off, Zhang Yan calmed himself down and sat down. After passing the challenge of understanding truth, not only did he completely erase his mark of being in the world, he also made up for his shortcomings. It was just that as his cultivation increased, new flaws would appear. This was something that could never be made up for. But it was also because of this that his cultivation could improve. The biggest gain from this was that his spiritual power and cultivation had greatly increased. This was what he relied on to open up the world. With a change of heart, the spiritual power that was originally spreading out slowly retracted, and all the spiritual power that was fighting against him gradually weakened. This did not mean that the spiritual power would not come here anymore, but under his will, it would never touch him. In other words, the power that he gathered surpassed the expansion of his peers. This was something that he could not do before killing Wan Zhen, because it required even more spiritual power. Just now, he was able to get rid of his peers and achieve his goal. Because he avoided the entanglement of many spiritual powers, after a long time, his spiritual power seemed to have disappeared from the void. Of course, this was not true disappearance. If that was the case, then he would be isolated from the world and fall into eternal silence. Right now, he was only infinitely close to this. The deeper his spiritual power receded, the further away he was from his peers, and the harder it was for others to find the world he opened up. However, this place was also dangerous. If he was not careful, he might fall into it and never be able to return to the void. Zhang Yan had already deduced this in the past, so he was well aware of it. As he went deeper and deeper, he sensed that he'd already arrived at his limits, and then his divine will stopped here for an instant. At the same time, a world frieze that was like a jade cocoon suddenly opened up. Clear and misty light emanated from within it, and then it instantly formed the world, the universe, the sun, the moon, and the stars. He sensed it slightly and found that as long as he was here, he would only be connected to this world, and he would not be able to sense the other worlds. This ensured that he would not fall into eternal silence, nor would he fight against his peers. It was as if he was in the gap between the two. It was no wonder that it was difficult for outsiders to find the location of his world. As long as he, the master, did not go out, it meant that he did not exist to his peers. However, there were still traces. It was as if that existence came, he would definitely be able to find the location of the world. Otherwise, the almighty cultivator who opened the world would not be in such a hurry to find a place of refuge. Only by controlling the cloth as soon as possible could he truly be safe. At this moment, he pondered for a while and took out the mask again. He wanted to use the weak connection to try to find where the faceless Taoist came from. He did not do this before because he was not fully prepared. Now that the world was opened, even if the faceless Taoist came again, he would not be afraid. His divine will followed the karmic connection and traced back to the source. Not long after, he saw a place. It was a mirror lake, and it was unknown how big it was. It looked like it was embedded in the void, but no matter how he looked, he could only see the side facing him, and could not see the back. After that, all the karmic connections were completely severed. There was no doubt that this person had appeared from here. He could now confirm that this person was indeed not in the void. Otherwise, he would not have been able to find this place so smoothly. At this moment, he tried to explore, but found that whether it was magic power or chi dynamic, he could not see the situation inside. After thinking about it, he thought that this should also be a place of refuge. Although the faceless Taoist would prevent other people from improving their cultivation, it did not mean that this person would pin all his hopes on this. He would also find a way out, and it was very likely that this was the place. After taking a deep look at this place, his consciousness returned to his real body. He then looked at the world behind him, and a wisp of consciousness had already sunk into Xianyuan heaven. Chapter 1978. When Zhang Yan's consciousness entered Qinghuan Palace, he sensed something strange in his heart. It was as if there was something in this world that was incompatible with the outside world. It was like a speck of dust landing on a flawless white wall. He couldn't help but look over and suddenly found that there were several places that seemed to be in the present world but were different from the present world. However, when he looked at those places, they suddenly disappeared as if they had never existed. No matter how hard he looked, he couldn't find any trace of them. He was somewhat familiar with this situation. It was as if the Xian stone was not affected by any external force. As long as he tried to search for it, it would automatically hide. He pondered for a bit. Could this be where the real chaos heaven was? This was possible. He couldn't find it in the past because his cultivation was still weak. He had previously guessed that the ancestors of the sect had ascended to this world. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but become interested. He immediately formed a spell and tried to divine it. In the past, no matter how he searched, this place would always be empty, but this time he found something. Not long after, he saw that one of the realms was faintly discernible. In about 2 to 3 years, it would have an intersection with the world he was in. It was also because of this that he was able to sense it so easily. At that time, as long as a powerful cultivator managed to break the door, he would be able to find an opportunity to enter. He became spirited. As he continued to divine it, he found that it was very likely he would miss it. This was because the future was filled with countless variables. If there was an external force or if Bushutian changed, causing the Xian stone to appear early, it would deviate from his current divination. Then this boundary would no longer appear. However, he couldn't actively participate, or else the evolution would be disrupted. Thus, he could only choose to let nature take its course. He thought about it and felt that there was no need to force it. Since he could see it as long as his cultivation increased, then once he controlled Bushutian, he would be able to see the mysteries. Thus, he gathered his thoughts and looked toward the heavens of the present world. It turned out that in order to prevent Ancestor Yao Han and the others from implicating him in karma and using this to find Bushutian, he had completed his Tao cultivation. Other than a few people, he did not speak of this matter to his sect or even to his disciples. Not to mention that the 3 of them had already disappeared. Even if they were still around, it would not be difficult for him to suppress them with his cultivation and magic treasures. Thus, he was no longer a threat. Now that he'd kept his enemies out of the world and severed his own stubbornness, it was time for him to proclaim the Tao and spread his qi throughout the heavens and the earth to clearly tell all living beings in the world that all things should be controlled by him, and all worlds should be ruled by him. As soon as this thought arose, the bell within Qinghuan Palace instantly rang loudly, and the deep and distant sound instantly spread throughout the myriad of worlds in the world, and all living beings in the world heard it. No one told them, but they naturally knew what had happened. There was a supreme being in the void who had transcended beyond all worlds. As the sound of the bell rang, it turned into a wisp of ethereal Tao sound. At this moment, those who heard it felt as if there were endless mysteries leaping into the depths of their souls, and unknowingly, they were immersed in it. For some reason, they understood that this was because the grand supreme Tao ancestor was born in this world and felt the virtue of creation. Now that he had plucked the fruit of Tao, he was giving it back to all living beings. However, the door to the great Tao still depended on fate. Those who were not fated to hear it would forget it in an instant, and when they tried to find it later, they could no longer enter the door. Those who were fated, on the other hand, trembled with excitement, and felt as if they could die without regrets after hearing the Tao in the morning. At this moment, within the remaining heavens, Dan Yi, Michihito Ichido, and even Fu Qingming and the others could not help but hear the rules of the great Tao. When Taoist Wan Ke opened another heaven, they already had some guesses about Zhang Yan's path, but the result was too shocking, and they still did not dare to believe it. Now, they could undoubtedly confirm it. Dan Yi sensed the wondrous great Tao that was passed down, and he felt that the profoundness within was truly inexhaustible. It was still easy to understand at the beginning, but as he went deeper, he soon felt that it was difficult to understand. However, he soon discovered that he could actually use this wondrous Tao to deduce the path ahead of him. Seeing this, he immediately tried to deduce whether he had a chance to achieve Tao. However, after this round of calculation, the result was that his cultivation was lacking, and his magic power was especially weak. He was unable to break through the stubborn world at all, let alone open that door. Although he had long guessed that this would be the case, after clearly knowing that there was no hope for him, he also sighed regretfully. Once he made up his mind, there was no more sound in his ears. At this moment, Fu Qingming and Michihito Ichido were also there, listening carefully to this faint sound. However, because one of them had no intention to climb to the upper realm, and the other had long since cut off the thought of Tao, they did not have these worries, and only immersed themselves in the principles of Tao. Fortunately, these were all deliberately passed down by Zhang Yan, so no matter how they listened, they would not be lost in it, and at most, they would forget it afterwards. Qinsang School, in the upper extreme hall. Qi Yuntian stood on the platform with his hands behind his back, listening to the grand sound of the bell, as if he heard the sound of Tao. He did not move for a long time. After a long while, he sighed, Hall Master Du Zhen has achieved the upper realm, it is my Qinsang School's great fortune. Since the head of the sect is not here, I should personally go and congratulate him. When I am not here, Yingyue, help me take care of the matters of the sect. If there are any difficult matters, wait for me to return before we discuss. Standing behind him was the eldest disciple of the sect, Guan Yingyue. He bowed and said, disciple respectfully accepts the decree. In the boundless pool of thunder at Anjin Temple. Zhang San was originally in a state of calmness, but when she suddenly heard this voice, she opened her eyes and looked up into the sky. Others could only hear the sound of the Tao, but she felt a sense of familiarity from it. She couldn't help but sigh softly. She was both happy and shocked. Big Brother has finally reached that step. However, with Big Brother's heart and spirit, this isn't difficult to imagine. Zhang Yan was sitting in the hall deep in thought. He used the sound of the bell to evolve the sound of Tao, which was equivalent to enlightening the living beings in the universe. For the almighty cultivators of the God refinement realm to do this personally, the benefits they would receive would be immeasurable. In the universe, countless living beings received the law of fate and had the possibility of entering Tao in the future. As for those who had already begun to cultivate, their path of cultivation would also be broadened. He did not think about this before, but he suddenly felt that doing this would be beneficial to him, so he did it conveniently. However, when he thought about it, he did not know why he did it. Because it seemed that no matter how the living beings in the world evolved, it would not affect him. If this world was not connected to Busu Tian, when the river ran out, it would completely disappear. So maybe this was still related to Busu Tian. He saw that he could not find an answer at the moment, so he did not pursue it. 3 days later, the sound of the bell finally weakened and could not be heard anymore. Jingyu entered the hall and reported, "Master, a few venerable ones have come to congratulate you, they are waiting outside the hall." Zhang Yan said, "Call them in." Not long after, Lu Yenyi, Wei Zihong, Yuan Jianqing, and the rest of the disciples who had cut off their mortal bodies came to the hall. They saw their master sitting on the jade platform, and above him, there was a mysterious cloud that covered the sky. Behind him, 5-colored light shone through the universe, and it was difficult to see the shape of the qi. They all came up and bowed, saying, "Disciple greets Master, congratulations on entering the upper realm, Taoist Master Taishang." Zhang Yan smiled and asked them to get up. Because of the various changes in the void, it did not affect the real world. So even though he had cut off his mortal body, not much time had passed in this world, so the disciples' cultivation did not improve much. However, they were still his direct disciples, so when they heard the sound of the Tao, they all had some understanding. He gave them a few words of advice, and with a thought, a few talismans floated down and landed in the hands of the disciples below. He said, "Although I have seen you enter the upper realm, the Tao is boundless, and you need to be vigilant at all times. This is what I made. If you encounter any danger, you can use this to escape to a place of protection." The 3 disciples received the talismans, and they all thanked their master for his kindness, and kept them well. Zhang Yan looked at Lu Yenyi and said, "I have already calculated that within 100 years, Kai Wei and Kating will have the fate to enter the Tao. As my eldest disciple, you should pay attention." Lu Yenyi bowed and said, "I will remember, and when the time comes, I will personally receive the 2 junior sisters, and return to Master's seat." Zhang Yan also gave Wei Zihong and Yuan Jianqing a few words of encouragement, and allowed them to stay in the Qinghuan Palace to cultivate, and then he ordered them to leave. On the second day, Dan Yi and the other 2 came to congratulate him. In the past, they had only heard rumors about the divine will, but now that Zhang Yan had succeeded, they could not do so, and to show their respect, they all came in person. Although they could not enter the Tao, they admired the glory of the upper realm, and after they entered the palace to congratulate him, they could not help but ask about the matter of spiritual cultivation. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Without entering the realm, it is difficult to understand the reason, but even if I speak clearly and explain all kinds of methods, I will not be able to enter your ears." The 3 of them were deep in thought. At this time, Dan Yi asked, "May I ask Palace Master Qinghuan, have you seen a fellow Taoist?" Zhang Yan smiled, but he shook his head and did not speak. It was not that he did not want to tell them, but as long as the people in this world knew the name of a Taishang, then their consciousness clone might appear from the god. If it was a friendly alliance like Xinchang and Zhan Yuan, it would be fine, but if it was someone like Yahan Ancestor or Qing Sheng, it would be the same as letting the enemy in. Although he did not say it explicitly, with Dan Yi's cultivation, it was not difficult for him to feel this, and he knew that he had asked something he should not have asked, so he quickly bowed and apologized, "I was rash." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "It's fine." The 3 of them were afraid of disturbing his cultivation, so they did not stay for long, and soon left. In the following days, Qi Yuntian and the heads of the major sects came to congratulate him, and when everything calmed down, it was already half a year later. Zhang Yan's consciousness did not leave, but sat in the Qinghuan Palace, waiting for the arrival of that place. In his senses, it was getting closer and closer to that place. He waited for 2 years, and suddenly, there was movement outside the universe, and it was like a star falling into the world. He woke up from his meditation, and after a brief calculation, his eyes flashed, and he pointed with his finger. In an instant, a door slowly opened in front of him. Chapter 1979. Zhang Yan tried to look into the door but found that he could not see what was going on inside. This was undoubtedly the method of someone of the same generation. Although he had already connected the two realms, he could still feel that there was a thin thread between the realm on the other side and Busu Tian. If he was not careful, he might disappear again. Therefore, he did not stay outside for too long. With a thought, he turned into a shadow clone and entered. Once he entered, what he saw was a mass of misty clouds. Their movements were erratic, and they gathered and dispersed without form. Apart from that, there was nothing else. He sensed that this world was particularly strange. It was invisible, as if everything was changing. However, if he looked carefully, there were some signs. As he looked deeper, he gradually recognized a shape. Seeing this scene, he already had a guess. After pondering for a moment, he stretched out his hand and pulled away the clouds in front of him. This cloud was not ordinary. There was a hidden universe inside. If a living being was unknowingly drawn into this, they would only be able to rotate in this thing, thinking that the inside world was just now. Even if a true young cultivator was here, they might not be able to distinguish it. However, he was a spirit refinement cultivator who killed Wan Zhen. Naturally, he could see through it at a glance. Without these obstacles, the true appearance of the inside world was soon revealed. It was as if a colorful picture was unfolding in front of him. Countless misty clouds floated in the air, colorful petals danced in the air, rainbow bridges flew, white waterfalls splashed, celestial music lingered in the ears, and in the misty mist, long dragons roamed in and out, playing there. His eyes swept across. Although there were other living beings here, there was no doubt that these dragons were the masters of this world. At this moment, he felt a strange aura. He looked up into the sky, and his eyes continued to look deeper. Soon, he saw a crystal jade dragon eye floating there. With just one glance, he knew the use of this thing. It was used to prevent the divination of powerful beings. Of course, if he were to forcefully do so, he would still be able to see some things. However, since the other party had placed this item here, it had already indicated that he did not like being spied on by others. Moreover, he had only come here to visit and did not intend to be an unwelcome guest. Naturally, there was no need for him to do so. At this time, in the floating mountain, there were two big dragons with a little bit of cultivation seemed to have sensed his arrival. They turned in the clouds and each turned into human form. One was a tall and straight man, wearing a golden robe and a tall crown. His appearance was dignified. The other was a delicate and pretty young girl, dressed like Guma, without any makeup, looking very simple. The two of them came to Zhang Yan uneasily and bowed to him. "May I know which Dao ancestor has come? We hope that Dao ancestor can forgive us for not welcoming you." Zhang Yan looked at them and said with a smile, "To be able to guess Ai's identity, your cultivation is not shallow. May I know what is the name of this place, and which Dao ancestor do you belong to?" The man hurriedly said, replying to this Dao ancestor, "There is no name here. The living beings here are only born knowing the heaven and earth. We are all the descendants of the ancestor saint." At this point, he was a little troubled. As for the name of the ancestor saint, us juniors also do not know. Ancestor saint? Zhang Yan pondered for a while. To be called the ancestor saint, it must be the source of a certain race's bloodline, and among the dragon species, the one who had such a title was undoubtedly the dragon ancestor. He once had a judgment that all the dragon species in the heavens had a common source, but he had never been able to confirm it, and he did not know if it was this one. He asked, "May I know where your ancestor is now?" The man replied, "The ancestor saint has not been here for a long time. We juniors have never seen him before, but every time an elder reaches the end of his life, he will be taken away by the ancestor saint." When Zhang Yan heard this, he could not help but become a little more interested. He came here to see if he could find the ancestors of his sect who had ascended, but he did not expect that this place was the land of the dragon species, and it was not quite the same as what he had thought before. However, he did not feel very disappointed, because when his consciousness returned to the present world, he had faintly felt a few chaotic heavens, and there was not excluding those that he had not seen. In the past, the people who had ascended from Qinsang school might have landed in one of them. Moreover, this land could be said to be very similar to those few places, so there might be some connection between them. Now that it was said that they could actually be taken away, there was no doubt that there was one more place for him to explore. He said, "Other than I wonder if there are any guests here." The man shook his head and said, "Ever since those elders were taken away, the two of us are the oldest here, and ever since we have been able to remember, we have never seen outsiders come here. However, there was once an elder who said that he wanted to go out to visit a friend. I don't know how he went out, but since then, we have never seen him again. Perhaps the two of them were not scheming, or perhaps they knew the power of his spirit refinement almighty being. They answered almost every question he asked and did not hide anything." When Zhang Yan heard this, he pondered for a moment. This place could be seen as a parasitic world in Bushu heaven. Logically speaking, if one did not reach the spirit refinement realm, it would be impossible to leave. He believed that the dragon ancestor had such power, but listening to the words of the two of them, the person who left was just an ordinary ancestor, so there should be some way to go to other places, such as using some treasure, or waiting for the two worlds to meet, to go to Bushu heaven. Of course, there was another possibility, and that was that there was a connection between Chaos Heaven, so he might be able to go to other places. At this moment, the girl standing beside the man said softly, "Our knowledge is shallow. If Tao Ancestor has any questions, you might as well go to the World Ancestor, he might be able to answer." The man also seemed to have thought of something and said, yes, the World Ancestor should know." Zhang Yan looked at the sky and said, "The World Ancestor that the two of you are talking about, is it the dragon of this world?" The girl said, "Yes, the World Ancestor is the son of the Saint Ancestor, and this world is the incarnation of the World Ancestor." Zhang Yan nodded slightly. Just now, he could already see that this world itself was formed from the body of a big dragon, and the dragon's eyes that hung high in the sky were its eyes, but ordinary people probably couldn't see it, nor could they talk to it. He said, "Thank you for telling me." After saying that, his consciousness moved, and he instantly appeared in front of a big dragon. The latter was originally in a deep sleep, but it suddenly woke up when it sensed the aura in front of it. In the blink of an eye, a wisp of cloud transformed into a middle-aged Taoist with a long beard, and he bowed and said, "Please forgive me for being rude, I didn't know that the Grand Supreme was here." From his words, Zhang Yan could tell that this person was indeed knowledgeable, so he said, "It's fine, how should I address you?" The middle-aged Taoist repeatedly said, "In front of the Grand Supreme, how dare you call yourself a fellow Taoist? You can just call me Shou Lang." Zhang Yan said with a smile, "I heard that you have an extraordinary background, you must know a lot." Shou Lang hesitated and said carefully, "May I know what you want to ask, Grand Supreme?" Zhang Yan paused slightly and said, "I wonder if you have heard of the great underworld ancestor's name?" Shou Lang thought for a moment and shook his head. "Reporting to Grand Supreme, I have not heard of this name." Zhang Yan's eyes flickered slightly. He had now seen the truth. Although what this person said was not false, the actual situation was not like that. When the ancestral master's name was mentioned, a certain piece of Shou Lang's memory mysteriously disappeared. This meant that Shou Lang knew something before, or at the very least, had heard of it. However, he had forgotten about it after he asked about it. From the looks of it, this person would probably not be able to answer any question that involved his level. In that case, he would not be able to ask anything even if he continued. He nodded and said, "So you don't know either, sorry to disturb you." Shou Lang hurriedly said, "I don't dare, Grand Supreme." He hesitated for a moment and said, "Just now, I suddenly remembered that when my father left, he said that if there are foreign guests who come here in the future and ask me something I don't understand, please stay. When the opportunity comes, I will naturally explain." Zhang Yan thought about it. This should not have been because the dragon ancestor had predicted that he would come here, but because he knew what the person who came here would ask. From this, he could imagine that this place and other similar places must be related to something important. Although this place was connected to the door of the modern world, after he left, the connection would be broken again. Therefore, he did not know how long it would take for him to come here again. If his consciousness stayed here, he might be able to find out the answer. However, he was not prepared to do that. In the silence, there were still endless disputes because of the different Tao intents. Moreover, he did not know the background of this dragon ancestor. This time, he had only come here to try and inquire. There was no need to get too deeply involved. Moreover, he had previously calculated that in about 100 years, there would be another muddy sky that connected to the modern world. He could wait until then and go there to take a look. He said goodbye to Shou Lang, waved his sleeves, and retreated from this muddy sky. As soon as the virtual body returned, he saw the door close with a loud bang. When he sensed again, there was no trace of that place. It was clear that it had left Bushutian. He thought about it. This domain itself was not a fixed world. Normally, it would disappear in a flash, but it could survive after leaving Bushutian. Either it had set up a method that he was not aware of, or after leaving Bushutian, it had gone to other places similar to Bushutian. If he deduced from this, it would be very interesting. However, inspired by this, he could not help but have a thought. Could he also create a domain like this? After thinking about it, he felt that although it was impossible to do the exact same thing, it could be done in a similar place. As long as a square rose between the fixed world and Bushutian, like a place in the muddy sky, it could be used to travel between the two worlds. It would become an excellent place to avoid disasters. If one day, the modern world was invaded by a powerful person from the outside, the disciples and sects of the same path could also hide in it. This was not him thinking too much, but no one knew the ability of the existence that had the ability to destroy everything. Even if it could not directly enter Bushutian, it was possible to invade this part of the modern world. Therefore, he needed to make arrangements in advance. Chapter 1980. After Zhang Yan came up with this idea, he first calculated and then decided to implement it. His consciousness turned and he first entered the world. He was born as a Taoist cultivator. Shenchang, Chaoying, and the other treasure spirits had never experienced the world of mortals, so they were fixed in a dull and lifeless state. However, his place was no different from the ordinary world of mortals. There were mountains and rivers, beautiful countries, plants, birds, and beasts. However, the living beings here were different from other places. Life and death had faded away. From the moment they were born, they were fixed in that moment. He casually intercepted a qi dynamic and took a strand of Bu Su Tian's Weili. He used his mana and made it fuse with each other. Then, with a push of his mind, a heaven appeared. This heaven could travel between the two worlds. It could be said that it fused with Bu Su and was also separated from Bu Su. It was somewhat similar to the Hun Tian. After doing this, he stretched out his hand and pointed at the real world that he created when he became a deity. In an instant, a door between the two worlds appeared. This world was constantly being maintained by his mana and had not collapsed yet. However, without a connection with a place like Bu Su Tian, which contained the essence of creation, it would eventually die. Among them, Wang Guang and the other sword attendant disciples were once his disciples, and they had contributed greatly during the battle between the three clans. It would be unfair for them to perish along with the present world, so he was prepared to bring them into this place. As long as they didn't perish in this world, they would be able to enjoy blessings and blessings. Wang Guang and the others were originally cultivating in the Forgottenly Mountain when they felt a grand intent coming down from the sky. They immediately knew what they needed to do. He and the rest of the sword attendant disciples informed the disciples of the Forgottenly Mountain and flew up into the sky. After a short while, they saw a realm gate in front of them. Just as the thought of crossing over rose in their minds, they felt like they had arrived at another world in a trance. When Zhang Yan saw that they had entered, he sent out another decree, ordering them to set up an abode of immortals cave here. Then, he stopped looking and returned his will to the Qinghuan Palace. Then, he tried to calculate whether this world would be exposed under the invasion of external forces. As he was calculating, Jingyu entered the hall and reported, "Master, Zhang Shangzhen has come to visit." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Just call her in." After a short rest, Zhang Zhen entered the main hall. She bowed and said, "Greetings, big brother. Little sister wishes big brother success." Zhang Yan gestured with his hand and said with a smile, "Little sister, you don't have to be so polite. Let's sit down and talk." Zhang Zhen brushed her sleeves and sat down beside him. Brother and sister chatted about their parting, after which Zhang Zhen said softly, "There's something I need to tell you, elder brother. Years ago, the various sects and clans of the 9 continents followed you to the mountain and sea realm. Not too long ago, I used the magic of karma to perform augury, and discovered that quite a few of them were descendants of second brother. I chose one of them as an apprentice, and accepted him as my apprentice. Elder brother, do you have any instructions for me?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "I don't have any instructions. Little sister, just do as you see fit." He looked at Zhang Zhen and asked, "Little sister, you seem to have something on your mind?" Zhang Zhen did not hide anything. She nodded and said, "I can't hide it from you." Before her master, Pang Yunxiang, was reincarnated, she had repeatedly urged her to find a way to make the sect more prosperous. She could say that she had done it, but she could also say that she had not. Her current cultivation had surpassed that of the founder. Under her painstaking efforts, the Inata Temple was now one of the major sections. It could be said that it was one of the most powerful sects apart from the 4 major sections. But at the same time, the 4 major sects had become more prosperous than before. This was the difference in resources. It was like comparing a lake and an ocean. With the same opportunity, the major sects would gain more. What she could not let go of the most was that she was the only one in the Inata Temple who had reached the level of mortal transformation. None of the disciples in the younger generation had the hope to achieve this state. If the sects stopped at this level in the future, then the distance between them and the 4 major sects would only get further and further. As time passed, the other sects would eventually catch up with them. Zhang Yan could tell what she was worried about. He smiled and said, "The difference in the Inata Temple is just a matter of martial arts. If you are interested, I can give you a martial art." Zhang Zhen said seriously, "I understand. This is something that you can do casually. I am not pretentious. It would be great if I could get your help. But I also know that everything has a cause and an effect. I have already received your favor last time, and I don't know when I can return it. You have already left the mortal world, so there is no problem with this. But I have to think for the sect. Moreover, if the Inata Temple were to cultivate external martial arts, then it would not be the Inata Temple anymore. So I can only thank you for your kindness." Zhang Yan nodded his head and said, "You can understand this, and that means you have a deep understanding of Tao." The prosperity of the various sects did not come out of nowhere. They were left behind by the predecessors. Now that the Inata Temple is prosperous, it is far better than the past. You have already surpassed the predecessors, so why do you have to be depressed? When your cultivation improves again, you will be able to live forever. As long as I am still here, I will be able to protect the living beings in this world. You only need to follow Tao and keep your heart of Tao. Then you will see something." Zhang Ji pondered for a moment and stood up. She bowed to her seat and said, "Little sister thanks elder brother for your guidance." In the land of Kuan-Shi, Lu Yenny sat in the cave residence and was quietly observing the mystery. After receiving the instruction from Zhang Yan, she was paying attention to the reincarnations of her 2 junior apprentice sisters, Wang Kaiwei and Wang Kading. In fact, she did not have the instruction. She had been paying attention to these 2 junior apprentice sisters from the same sect, but they did not have the qualifications to enter Tao. There was no benefit in entering the sect, so she had to wait for a suitable opportunity. The Wang sisters were first born in the 9 cities, but after so many reincarnations, they were no longer in this place. The 2 of them were originally sisters, and they cultivated under the same master. Naturally, there was a cause and effect between them. Although they were separated in the reincarnation cycle, they were either neighbors or relatives. They were never completely separated from each other. In this reincarnation, the 2 of them became sisters again. They were born in the family of Duke Fu, the Wei family. They were called Wei Wan and Wei Jiao. The state of Fu used to be the Bai tribe. To repay the kindness of the Ji family, just now, the name was changed to Fu, and the king took Fu as his surname. On this day, it was the lullaby festival in the capital. Whether it was the nobles or the commoners, as long as they were young men and women, they would go for a walk outside the city walls. The nobles were different from the commoners. They lined up in carriages, sprinkled water and flower petals along the way, and there were guards in the sky and on the ground. After leaving the city, they first paid respects to deity Yingxi. Then, they came to the lake, set up their tents, and watched the dance. The second son of the king, Fu Can, was sitting on a temporary platform, drinking with the servants from time to time. At this moment, he heard laughter and looked over. He was immediately attracted by it. He saw 7 to 8 girls walking over. Among them, there were 2 girls with skin like jade, bright eyes, and white teeth. They were exceptionally radiant. They were beauties that he had never seen in his life. He was stunned, and he did not even notice that his wine cup was tilted and wet his sleeves. He could not help but ask, "Which family are they?" The servant beside him whispered, "Young master, they are the Wei sisters." "They are the Wei sisters?" Fu Can revealed a surprised expression. He had heard of the beauty of the Wei sisters before, but it was common for the nobles to boast to each other, so he had never taken it to heart. Now that he saw them, he felt that the words he had heard in the past were not enough to describe the beauty of the 2 sisters. He could not help but exclaim, "I never thought that there would be such colors in our country. They can be called the twin jades of the country." The servant instigated, "It is said that the parents of the Wei sisters are not around, and they were raised by their aunt. However, their aunt recently remarried to the Silver Duke, and she intended to marry the sisters first. If young master is willing." Before he could finish, a shout came from the side. "Ridiculous!" A middle-aged official stood up in anger, pointed at him, and said, "Are you trying to harm young master?" The servant was stunned, and said, "Why does Duke Huang say so?" Duke Huang bowed to Fu Can and said seriously, "The 2 girls are beautiful, and not only are they famous in the country, they have also heard of them in Zhaoyuan. You can accept them, I can accept them, but young master alone cannot. If young master hears of this, he will definitely spread the news, and young master will not be able to escape the reputation of being a beauty lover. Then after 100 years, will the king choose a person who chases after beauty to be the king?" Fu Can was shocked, and he lowered his head to think, and said, "Duke Huang is right." He sighed with regret, "Let's drop this matter." Duke Huang saw that he was reluctant to part, and frowned. He took a step forward, and said in a low voice, "Young master looks at the beauty of the 2 girls, but in this subordinate's opinion, they are the source of disaster. If we keep them, there is a risk of disaster for the country. It is better to send them to Zhaoyuan." This. Fu Can was indeed a little reluctant. He wanted to become the monarch before taking in the 2 sisters. But when he heard this, it wasn't good for him to not respond. He closed his eyes and only opened them after a long while. He calmly said, "I'll leave this matter to Duke Huang." The Wei sisters did not know that their fate had been decided by someone else. Even though they were in the family of an official and had no one to rely on, they had no ability to make their own decisions. After a few months, the king issued an edict to send the 2 sisters to the faraway Mi country of Zhaoyuan. Once the edict was issued, almost without a moment's pause, there were 1,000 soldiers and cultivators escorting the 2 sisters on their way. In the carriage, Wei Wan was holding a silk scroll, and with the light from the pearls on the table, she was engrossed in reading it. Wei Jiao came over and asked curiously, "Is sister reading a Taoist book?" Wei Wan closed the scroll and sighed, "It's not a Taoist book. Little sister, you also know that other than the breathing technique that Elder Ji taught me, he did not allow us to read anything else. This is only related to a biography of the immortals and gods. 2 years ago, the 2 of them were fortunate enough to cultivate with the Ji clan. However, although the Ji clan treated them favorably, they were not allowed to call the Ji clan master, nor did they teach them any Taoist techniques. Instead, they were taught a qi cultivation method. They persevered and felt their strength gradually increase, but other than this, there was nothing else. Not to mention that they did not have the ability to drive a tiger into the sky, let alone the immortals and gods in the sky. Wei Xian moved closer to the carriage window and lifted the corner of the curtain to look at the cultivators riding on birds and heads. She said with infinite yearning, if I had learned Taoist techniques back then, I would not have had to go with the flow. I could have been like them, roaming the sky and riding the wind. Wei Wan said, I always felt that there was a reason why Elder Ji did not call us anything. Wei Xian pouted and said, Elder Ji might have gone senile. Wei Wan said seriously, don't say that. Wei Xian stuck out her tongue and said, I know. Wei Wan sighed and said, even if we ran away, the world is so big, where could we go? Wei Xian sat back on the soft couch and placed her hands on it. Her legs swayed back and forth lightly, and she said thoughtfully, this must be the binding of the mortal world that Elder Ji spoke of. I did not notice it in the past, but this kind of feeling really makes one unable to feel happy. At this moment, they heard the voice of a young man outside, laughing lightly, since you don't like it, why not break out of the cage and follow me to be free and unfettered? Wouldn't that be great? Chapter 1981. Who's there? Wei Jiao walked forward in surprise. She lifted the curtain and saw no one outside. The closest guards were 10 steps away and no one was near the carriage. She looked left and right but did not see anyone. Just as she was feeling puzzled, she heard a voice coming from the left. Here, here. She looked towards the source of the voice and was surprised to find a little person about the length of a finger standing on her shoulder. He had a smiling face, red lips, and white teeth. He was wearing an embroidered robe and a jade belt. He looked very delicate. She couldn't help but widen her eyes and asked curiously, where did this little person come from? Wei Wan revealed a vigilant expression and said, who are you? Why are you in our carriage for no reason? Although they were young, only 13 or 14 years old, they were used to seeing strange people and strange things. Although this little person's body didn't look big, from his voice and appearance, it was clearly a young man. She couldn't help but be on guard. The little person took out a folding fan from his sleeve and opened it. He said in a leisurely manner, my name is Jiao. Do the two ladies have any worries in your hearts? As long as you say it out loud, I will be able to resolve your worries. Wei Jiao found it interesting and secretly reached out to catch him. The little person sighed and said, wait, wait. He jumped and avoided being caught. He landed on the table at the side. Wei Wan felt that this person was not simple. She pulled Wei Jiao 2 steps back and stared at him. What do you want? The little person said innocently, why are you asking me? If the two of you didn't call for me, why would I come here? Wei Jiao put her hands behind her back and bent down to look at him. When she got a little closer, she suddenly stretched out a finger to point at him. However, the little person dodged it and shook his head at her. Wei Jiao pursed her lips and said, all right, you said you can resolve people's worries. Then tell me, what are your abilities? The little person jumped onto the brush stand and sat down. He waved his folding fan and said while shaking his head, I can go up to the sky and pluck the stars. I can also go down to the sea and catch the whales. I can determine good and bad luck and can hear sounds from thousands of miles away. I have all kinds of celestial methods and there is no way to describe them in detail here. Wei Jiao lightly snorted and said, I don't believe it. Her bright eyes turned as she said, why don't you show us your skills? The little man closed his fan and said, sure. He pointed the fan handle at the table and said, please take a look at this incense burner. The object he was pointing at was a gold, copper and silver-threaded cloud-child cauldron. Its shape was exquisite, and its surface was inlaid with silver. There were delicate and vivid patterns of flowers, birds, fishes, and insects. Sandalwood smoke curled out, and when it reached 3 feet, there was a ring that wrapped around it, showing the appearance of a cloud Ganoderma. It was a rare treasure, and it was their accompanying gift to Zhaoyuan this time. The Wei sisters saw that a sparrow on top of the incense burner suddenly came to life after the little person muttered a few words. It jumped down from above and chirped twice on the table. Then, it broke through the curtains and flapped its wings to fly away. Wei Jiao was surprised at first. Then, she looked at the sparrow flying into the distant sky with a look of yearning and envy on her face. The little person puffed out his chest and said proudly, "What do you think?" Wei Jiao came back to her senses and asked, "With your abilities, can you teach us sisters about this?" The little person laughed and said, "It's not impossible. If the two of you are willing to go with me, I can naturally teach you these small techniques." Wei Jiao was about to speak, but Wei Wan didn't wait for her to finish and pulled her back a little. She took a few steps back and said in a low voice, "Sister, don't believe his words. This person's origin is unknown, how can you just follow him?" Wei Jiao giggled and said in a low voice, "I didn't believe him, I just watched for fun. If we can learn this little person's skills, no one will be able to keep an eye on us. Sister, are you not tempted?" Wei Wan shook her head and said firmly, "Unorthodox Tao techniques are not the right path, so it's fine if we don't learn them. Once we leave this place, it's still the wilderness, and there's no place for us to stay. Moreover, Aunt once said that the human heart is more sinister than the world. This person came looking for us for no reason, but he still refuses to tell us his origin. He most likely has a purpose, so we can't be fooled." Wei Jiao secretly laughed at her sister for being too timid, but it wasn't that she didn't argue. She blinked and said, "Sister, don't be anxious. Let little sister try him again." She walked forward again and said, "You little person, you said you would bring me out, but there are so many guards outside, how can we let them go?" The little person said proudly, "Since I can come in, I can also go out. Don't the two of you want to learn my skills?" He took out a big bowl from his sleeve and placed it in front of the two of them. The bowl was filled with water, and it looked extremely clear. There was also a dark green tea leaf floating in the air. "As long as the two of you drink this spiritual tea, you can become the same size as me." He pursed his lips and whistled again. The bird that had flown out just now flew back. He pointed with his folding fan proudly, "Later, I will enlighten a few more birds from this furnace. Then, I can ride on the birds and fly away. From then on, I will be free." Wei Jiao looked at the bird that had been called back. She didn't know why, but she was a little unhappy. She said in a low voice, "So, you also don't feel free?" At this time, Wei Wan sat back down and said calmly, "If sire does this, I'm afraid we still won't be able to get out." The little person was surprised and asked, "Why?" Wei Wan said, "Sire has the ability to come in, but if I go out, there is a victory bird standing on the roof of the carriage. The moment we leave the carriage, it will let out a cry." The little person said, "That's easy." He then took out two hand scissors made of paper. With a shake of his hand, they fell to the ground and transformed into two people who looked just like the Wei sisters. Their expressions were a little stiff, but if one didn't look at them closely, they wouldn't be able to find any flaws. At this time, Wei Wan said in a low voice, "Sister, this person came prepared. He is clearly coming for us two sisters." Wei Jiao also nodded. Seeing the two of them hesitating, the little person said with a smile that wasn't a smile, "What, could it be that the two of you are unwilling?" Wei Jiao tilted her head and thought for a while. She asked, "If I drink this water, can I change back?" The little person laughed and said, "Of course I can. But what's wrong with being a little person?" He took out a flower seed from his pocket and said, "Look at this seed. I only need to eat one and it's equivalent to a meal. An ordinary fruit can provide me with a month's worth of food. The ferocious birds and beasts in the wilderness look down on me because I'm small. Not only do I not need to work hard for a living, there are also no external enemies to disturb me. It's much more free and unfettered than you people struggling in the human world." Wei Jiao said, "Allow me to discuss this with sister." The little person said, "Then I'll wait." Wei Jiao said softly, "Sister, this person is lying. What do you think?" Wei Wan said, "No matter what, that water definitely can't be drunk." Wei Jiao said, "I'm afraid that if we don't go with him now, he has a way to capture us." Wei Wan said, "I'll use words to calm him down." "Sister, you go pull the golden bell and let the guards deal with this person." The little person sighed and said, "Originally, if you drank this water, we could still talk nicely. Why must I use force? What a spoiler." He waved his folding fan and a gust of black wind came out. The two sisters swayed and fell on the bed. He then made a hand sign and 2 bowls of water flew up. They turned into smoke and entered their ears. Soon after, the 2 of them became the same size as him. With a stomp of their feet, white smoke rose and carried the 3 of them away. The moment he went out, there was a loud and clear bird's cry coming from the top of the carriage. The guards were immediately alerted and gathered around. The little person was also nervous. He didn't dare to stay any longer. He grabbed a handful of golden sand and threw it outside. In a split second, it turned into endless sand and blocked everyone's sight. He took the opportunity to escape. The Fu Kingdom was alone in the wilderness. The mutant magicians in the kingdom were quite outstanding and they also had magic tools bestowed by the divine monarch. He originally thought that he would have to spend a lot of effort to escape, but he didn't expect that it would be so smooth this time. He didn't know why. He was pleasantly surprised and didn't think too much about it. After 10 days, he flew back to his lair and landed in a narrow cave that was cut into the mountain wall. After a few days, the Wei sisters woke up one after another. They found themselves in a strange place. In front of them was a bronze cauldron. The little person was looking at the cauldron while they were tied up with thin ropes. Wei Jiao, however, wasn't afraid at all. She asked, "What kind of place is this?" The little person looked at her in surprise. "You woke up so quickly, but this is good." He chuckled and said, "You 2 sisters are born to be intelligent and have cultivated the righteous Taoist technique. You have a pure body and can be the catalyst for my cauldron of pills. Previously, I couldn't do anything to you 2 sisters in the kingdom. I didn't expect that the idiot in your kingdom would send you 2 cultivation seeds to another kingdom. It's a good thing for me. When I achieve the Taoist body, I will naturally remember your benefits." Wei Jiao looked at the cauldron and said, "We 2 sisters have studied under Elder Ji. If you dare to harm us, Elder Ji won't let you go." "Uncle Ji of the Fu Kingdom?" The little person was shocked and his expression changed several times. He didn't expect the 2 sisters to have such a background. He couldn't help but reveal a struggling expression, but then he became ferocious. "So what if he's Uncle Ji? The wasteland is so big. After I refine the 2 of you, I will find a demon king to rely on. How will he find me then?" At this moment, a hollow sound came from the cauldron. The little person became excited and danced beside the cauldron. He clapped his hands and sang a strange song. The 2 sisters' bodies floated up involuntarily and slowly moved towards the cauldron. Wei Jiao couldn't help but turn pale. She struggled a few times, but after realizing that it was useless, she angrily said, "Sister, we might not be able to escape this time. I would rather die than be eaten by the monsters." Wei Wan said sadly, "Elder Ji once said that if I can improve my Taoist technique, I will be able to open up a miracle. If we sisters are more diligent, we might be able to escape this disaster today." Wei Jiao's eyes were red. She said, "Sister, if there's a chance to escape, I will definitely train hard from now on." The little person heard her and laughed. Just as he was about to mock her, a voice came from outside the cauldron. "Since the 2 senior sisters have such a wish, how can I not fulfill it?" The little person was shocked. He looked outside and said, "Who is it?" Outside the cave, a wisp of smoke rushed in and a majestic white jade lion came in. On its back sat a handsome young Taoist. He came down from the lion but did not look at the little person. He bowed to the 2 sisters and said, "Greetings, senior apprentice sisters. Junior apprentice brother greets you." Chapter 1982. As soon as the young Taoist entered, a gentle manna was emitted. The Wei sisters who were flying towards the cauldron were immediately stopped, and then they were slowly put down. The little person was disrupted, and his head swelled. He was furious and scolded, where did this wild Taoist come from? How dare you ruin my plans? The young Taoist glanced at him and sneered, you're just a mountain spirit, how dare you make a ruckus in front of me? As he spoke, he waved his sleeve, and the little person was swept away by a gust of wind. He was immediately suppressed by a surge of mana, and his limbs were spread out on the ground, unable to move. He could not speak, and only his eyeballs could be seen moving around. At this moment, the ropes on the Wei sisters fell. They had just recovered from their shock, and after sorting out their emotions, they looked at the Taoist. Strangely, they had never seen this person before, but at this moment, he gave them a sense of familiarity. Wei Wan took a few steps forward and bowed. She said gratefully, thank you for saving us. How should I address you? The young Taoist smiled, senior sister, you don't have to be so polite. My name in this life is Tsin Shao. Wei Wan thought for a while and said, I'm afraid you're mistaken. We sisters are the daughters of Fu Guo's Duke Wei. We have never traveled far in our lives. I'm afraid we're not the senior sisters that you're talking about. Tsin Shao smiled and said, senior sisters, you don't have to worry. You just haven't awakened your memories from your previous lives, so I'm afraid you still don't recognize me. His previous life was Fu Baoxing. When he was in the Dongxing continent, he grew up under the wings of the Wang sisters. He was very close to them, so this time, he received Lu Yenni's care and specially came to welcome the Wei sisters back to their sect. However, rashly receiving them might not be a good thing for the two of them. When a reincarnated disciple entered the sect, not only did they have to have the fate of Tao, they also had to have the Tao heart. Before the Wei sisters awakened the memories of their previous lives, they had focused on this life. Even after they were awakened, it was impossible for them to completely deny the experiences of this life. Coincidentally, this phase was also the extremely important foundation establishment phase. This involved how far a cultivator could go on the path of Tao. In this life, the two sisters were born in a court official's family, they were used to a life of luxury and rarely suffered hardship. Therefore, in this place, they needed to temper their mental state. Originally, under Lu Yenni's orders, he would make appropriate arrangements, but he didn't expect that the two sisters would attract the attention of demons, so he didn't have to do so deliberately. After experiencing a life and death crisis, it was as if the two scribes' hearts had gone through a round of tempering, which was extremely beneficial for their future cultivation. Past life memories. Wei Jiao was surprised and said, Taoist priest, are you saying that we sisters and you are from the same sect? Tsin Shao said, yes. The two sisters looked at each other in disbelief. Although this was their first time meeting Tsin Shao, they inexplicably trusted him and were willing to believe his words. Wei Jiao had a lively temperament and quickly accepted this explanation. She curiously asked, Taoist Tsin, that demon said that he wanted us sisters to have a pure body so that he could use it to refine medicine. What is this all about? Tsin Shao said, this is because the two senior sisters are cultivating a superior Taoist technique, which is indeed a great tonic for the demon. That's why this demon coveted you. Now that Kunshi continent was flourishing because of the people's prosperity, Taoist techniques were gradually reviving. The demons also learned a lot and began to pay attention to cultivation. However, most of these people were born with insufficient foundation tools. They could only find a cultivator who cultivated a superior Taoist technique and refine it into a pill to make up for their deficiency. As for people like the Wei sisters who only knew how to cultivate but didn't have any protective spells, they were the best medicine for them. Wei Wan said, is Taoist priest Tsin mistaken? We sisters only cultivated some breathing techniques. Tsin Shao smiled and said, senior sisters, your technique must have been taught by the Ji family, right? Tsin Wan couldn't help but nod and asked in surprise, how did you know? Tsin Shao said, back then, the Ji family was taken care of by our master. When she saw the two senior sisters, she calculated the cause and effect. In order to repay this favor, she taught you this orthodox Taoist technique. This is also a common thing in the Xianmen. Speaking of this, he paused for a moment. It's okay if you two senior sisters don't understand what I'm saying now. As long as you follow me back to the mountains to cultivate, you'll understand everything when your past experiences are restored. Of course, if you two senior sisters aren't willing, I can also escort you back to the mortal world. Wei Wan thought about it. According to what Xin Shao said, if she could be used as a tonic by the demon, then even if she went to Zhao Yuan, she wouldn't necessarily be able to live a stable life. Moreover, apart from this, they were just weak girls without any supernatural powers or spells. Their fates could only be entrusted to others. She had seen a lot of strange stories and was deeply interested in those immortals who could fly in the sky and burrow into the earth. She was very willing to follow Xin Shao, but she had a calm temperament and didn't immediately make a decision. She asked softly, "Sister, what do you think?" Wei Jiao had experienced a life and death crisis and understood that she was weak. She didn't want to be manipulated by others anymore. She immediately said, "Elder sister, what can we do in Zhao Yuan? Not to mention living under someone else's roof, we might even be given away like goods. It's better to follow Taoist priests and back to cultivate. Even if we have to eat the wind and drink the dew every day, I'll accept it." Xin Shao couldn't help but laugh. "Senior sisters, don't worry. Even if we go back to the mountains, we won't have to eat the wind and drink the dew. However, senior sister is right. As long as we are in this world and haven't transcended, we will either be eaten by demons or eaten by humans. This is the binding of the mortal world." When the two sisters heard this, they both looked pensive. Xin Shao looked at the little person and waved his hand, taking it into his palm. He then tapped the space between its eyebrows and instantly turned it into a wooden puppet with complete facial features. He said, "Little brother won't deal with this mountain spirit on your behalf. Senior sisters, it's up to you whether you want to kill it or let it go." As he said this, he pushed the person forward. Wei Jiao was very bold. She took it and pinched the little person's nose hard. She snorted and said, "I'm going to teach it a good lesson when we go back." Xin Shao said, "Senior sisters, please follow me." He held the jade white lion with his left hand and turned around to walk outside. The Wei sisters followed him out of the cave and immediately discovered that the world outside had become incomparably vast. It was as if everything had been magnified dozens of times. Xin Shao took out 2 medicinal pills from his sleeve and said, "Senior sisters, you've been poisoned by that mountain spirit's abnormality powder. You've become the same size as it. As long as you take these pills, you'll be able to change back to your original appearance." The 2 sisters each took a pill, covered their faces with their sleeves, and swallowed the pills. Immediately, they felt their minds become absent-minded. They found themselves standing at the edge of a cliff. If they took another 2 steps, they'd be in a bottomless abyss. They couldn't help but feel their minds shake. However, the 2 of them had cultivated for 2 years. Although their faces turned pale when they saw this scene, their feet firmly nailed to the ground as if they were rooted to the ground. Xin Shao looked at them and nodded inwardly. He said, "Senior sisters, please get on my mount's back." The Wei sisters looked over and saw that the jade white lion was currently standing on clouds and was suspended in midair. Wei Jiao was very bold. Without saying anything, she took a few steps forward and grabbed the jade white lion's mane. Before she could exert any strength, she felt a force supporting her and she sat sideways on the lion's broad back. She patted the lion and called out, "Big sister, come here quickly." Wei Wan nodded lightly. She cautiously took a few steps forward. Once she grabbed the lion's mane, she felt her body become weak. Then, she found herself sitting together with Wei Jiao. Xin Shao said, "Senior sisters, sit tight." He took a step forward and instantly soared into the clouds. The jade white lion also carried the 2 of them and spread its wings to follow. At first, the Wei sisters were still a little nervous. However, when they realized that there was a force supporting them on the lion's back, they didn't have to worry about falling. Thus, they relaxed. The 2 of them looked at the flowing river below them. It was as if the river had cut a zigzag white line on the ground. The mountains were shaped like wrinkled silk, and countless plants covered their field of vision like thick green velvet. This was a scene that they'd never seen before. At the same time, they felt a sense of novelty. At the same time, they were secretly envious of the ability to fly with the wind and roam the universe. After flying for half a day, they saw a floating altar in the sky. There was a drum and a bell hanging from it. It was grand and imposing. Xin Shao explained, this is a transfer array altar set up by the various sects in the 9 provinces. We can go to the White Mang Mountain Manor with this. When the Taoist on duty on the array altar saw that it was Xin Shao, he hurriedly removed the restriction on the altar and allowed him to enter. Xin Shao nodded at him and said, "Thank you, fellow Taoist." The Taoist looked flattered and said, "You're welcome, you're welcome." When Wei Wan saw this scene, she thought, it seems that this Taoist Xin is also a person with a high status among the immortals. As the cultivators of the various heavens came to the Kunshi continent to open up caves and impart Taoist techniques, the various countries of the human Tao gradually understood the situation of cultivators. However, other than the 4 great Yuan Zun, the only ones who were truly familiar with them were the cultivators who had more contact with the various countries. As for the rest, they didn't know much. At this time, a light curtain suddenly rose above the altar, and the jade white lion passed through it. In the eyes of the 2 sisters, the surrounding scenery suddenly changed, and a big clear lake appeared in front of them. When they looked again, this lake was situated on top of a mountain, and the surroundings were covered in white snow. There were herons circling above the lake, and they would let out a cry from time to time. Xin Shao said, "This is the White Mang Mountain." Wei Wan asked, "Taoist Xin, what kind of person is your senior sister?" Xin Shao smiled and said, "It's not convenient for me to say. It's just that under Master's command, senior sister's cultivation is the highest. Senior sister is also in charge of all matters in the sect." While they were talking, the jade white lion had already reached the surface of the lake. However, it didn't stop and plunged headlong into the lake. The 2 sisters first felt that there was no sound in their ears. Then, their eyes suddenly opened, and all kinds of sounds came back together. They found themselves in a spacious water manor. The walls were embedded with brilliant pearls, and there were exquisite stone pillars supporting them everywhere. Xin Shao pulled the jade white lion to the ground and said, "Senior sisters, follow me to pay respects to Master first. Then, we'll pay senior sister a visit." At this moment, a female disciple in a light yellow dress walked over. She bowed to him and said, "Martial Uncle Xin, and martial uncles, please follow me." Xin Shao said, "Thank you, martial nephew." The female disciple said, "You're welcome." The female disciple led the way. Following the formation door, they soon arrived in front of a majestic hall. Then, they stopped and stood to one side. Xin Shao, on the other hand, greeted them and led the Wei sisters inside. Once inside, they saw a memorial tablet enshrined at the top, with the words, "Grand Supreme Tao Lord of Hun Tian Wu Xian Yuan Yuhuan," written on it. Wei Wan had always been a calm person. When she saw this memorial tablet, she couldn't help but ask, "Taoist Xin, could the master that you're talking about be one of the 4 great Yuan Zun, the Xian Yuan holy man?" Xin Shao smiled and said, "That's what outsiders call him. Master is the Taisheng Taoist Lord. The Yuan Zun of this world is one of Master's countless incarnations." He walked forward and kowtowed to the memorial tablet. Then, he said, "Senior sisters, since you've seen Master's memorial tablet, why don't you come forward to pay your respects?" Chapter 1983. The beginning of the heavens was the title given to the spirit refinement almighty beings who had transcended beyond the mortal world. Zhang Yan's original title also included the word Dian, but the disciples in the sect did not want to use his name, so they omitted it when worshipping him. The Wei sisters did not expect that the Master Xin Shao spoke of had such a great background. After paying their respects in a daze, the female disciple arranged for them to stay in a large and spacious abode for the night. Even after a long time, the 2 still did not come back to their senses. Suddenly, Wei Jiao grabbed her sister's arm and shook it vigorously. She said excitedly, "Sister, sister, our master is Xianyuan Dao Lord." Wei Wan was shaken so much that she could not sit still. She looked at her sister reproachfully, but then her expression changed and she solemnly corrected her sister. It's the Taishang Dao ancestor. Sister, don't say it wrong. Wei Jiao nodded and said, I know. Wei Wan put her hand on her chest and let out a sigh of relief. Although she said so, she still felt a little uncertain in her heart. She was even a little worried that this was just an illusion. She did not know what kind of realm the Taishang Dao ancestor was, nor did she have such a concept, but she knew about Xianyuan Dao Lord. In the legends of the human path, the four great creators, Yuan Zun, were the beginning of the heavens. Everything in the world was created by the four of them. They were the origin of all Taoism in the world. They lived high above the heavens and did not connect with the people of the world. Even the heavenly god emperor only managed the world on behalf of the four of them. For them, this was really too far away. But now she was actually told that her master in her previous life was one of them, Yuan Zun. She already felt that the ordinary cultivators were unreachable, let alone a Dao Lord. She really did not dare to believe this. The two of them could not calm their minds for a long time, but they heard a voice coming from outside. Are the two uncle masters in? Wei Wan immediately came back to her senses. She stood up from the soft couch, tidied her makeup and clothes, and said, Come in. The curtain was lifted, and it was the female disciple who came in. She bowed to the two of them and said, Greetings to the two uncle masters. After that, she moved aside, and 8 maids walked in with a brocade tray. On the tray, there were a few sets of clothes and a dressing case. There were also glass pots, cups, and many other miscellaneous items. Wei Jiao caressed the cloth and found that it was smooth and exquisite without any stitches. It was far superior to the Fu Kingdom's weaver. She couldn't help but click her tongue in wonder. The female disciple said, This is the rainbow-colored silk robe. The color of the robe is naturally woven from the 7-colored silk that the silkworm spits out. It's one and the same, and it can resist water and fire weapons. As she spoke, she held up a pair of bracelets. As she moved, a crisp sound rang out. This pair of bracelets can calm one's mind and repel evil spirits. If the two martial uncles encounter the mountain spirits and monsters again, you won't have to be afraid. After putting it down, she pointed to the last brocade tray. There are 2 cosmos sachets here, and they can contain anything. There are 3 stacks of treasured talismans inside, and each has its own use. If the 2 martial uncles have any personal belongings, they can all be stored inside. There's no need to put them elsewhere. Wei Wan looked over and saw that every item could be called a treasure. However, she also knew that since she had entered the immortal sect, these things were presumably normal. She looked at the female disciple and asked, May I know how to address this female immortal? The female disciple took a step back and bowed slightly. I don't dare to be addressed like this by the 2 martial uncles. Disciple's name is Xiao Jing, and I'm just a registered disciple under teacher. Wei Wan pondered for a moment and said, Daoist Xiao Jing, us sisters have just entered this place, and there are many things we don't understand. We need to consult you. Xiao Jing said, I don't dare. If martial uncles have any doubts, feel free to ask. Wei Wan walked forward and gently pulled her to sit down. Then, she started to inquire about the various matters in White Radiance Water Manor. Xiao Jing answered patiently. It didn't take long for Wei Wan to understand the various titles here, the relationship between the upper and lower levels in the manor, and even the cultivation realms. Xiao Jing saw that it was already late, so she stood up and said, It's already late, so I won't disturb the 2 martial uncles' rest any longer. There are books behind the wall, you 2 martial uncles can browse as you please. Wei Wan also stood up and said apologetically, That's fine too. Daoist Xiao Jing also needs to cultivate. I'm really sorry for disturbing you for so long today. Xiao Jing repeatedly said that it was fine. After she bid farewell, 2 maids came forward and asked softly, Does honored guest want to take a bath? The Wei sisters had long cultivated to the pure body, and could be said to have jade bones and ice muscles. Their bodies were untainted by dust, but after being captured by the demons, some corners of their clothes were worn out, so they had to be changed eventually. Therefore, they followed the maids to the earth-fire hot spring in the back room to wash up, and then took a short rest. When they came out, they only felt that their fatigue was gone, and they had regained their original spirit. Wei Jiao, however, didn't forget that mountain spirit. She found a few small needles and ruthlessly pricked the little person's body. Then, she placed it on a seat of a shrine and made a face at it. Wei Wan didn't know whether to laugh or cry at her own younger sister's actions. She lightly shook her head and moved forward. She went around a screen and walked into a corridor inlaid with glazed jade walls. She saw colorful fish swimming back and forth on both sides, and she was amazed. She stopped for a moment, and just past this place, she came to a study room at the side. Immediately, she smelled a faint sandalwood fragrance, and her mind instantly became clear. She looked over and saw that the long table on the brush stand was well arranged. Soft brocade was laid out at the bottom, and bundles of jade scrolls were placed on the simple and unadorned bookshelves. There was a pearl lamp stand in the corner, illuminating the place with a magnificent radiance. She took a few steps forward and knelt down in front of the table. She took the bundle of jade scrolls closest to her eyes and slowly opened it. She discovered that it was a scroll of Taoist techniques that described how to move things. She couldn't help but feel surprised. Her eyes turned. The jade scrolls were placed very casually, which meant that they weren't valuable at all. Then, the things recorded in the jade scrolls must be similar. She thought to herself, as expected of the Taoist ancestors' disciples. Just a random study room has so many secret Taoist techniques. She carefully looked at the scroll in front of her. She tried to hold the spell according to the scroll, and only felt her breath move. The things on the table suddenly shook, and the curtain in the distance fluttered. Then, she felt a tightness in her chest, as if all the strength in her body had been sucked out. She and Wei Jiao had only cultivated for 2 years. Although their foundation was laid, it was still far from the time to cultivate the profound Taoist techniques. At least, they had to enter the realm of qi cultivation. Forcefully cultivating would only result in twice the effort with half the result. She knew her limits. Seeing that it was inappropriate, she didn't continue. She immediately closed the scroll and didn't look at it anymore. She went to the praying mat and breathed in and out for a while. Then, she returned to her bed and slept. The night passed, and the 2 sisters woke up early in the morning. After washing up and dressing themselves in front of the mirror, a maid came to serve them medicinal pills, tea, and honey jujube pills. Wei Wan picked up a pill and swallowed it with water. She suddenly felt a cooling sensation enter her stomach, and her mind became clear. Her slight hunger also disappeared. Wei Jiao also swallowed a pill, but she sighed in disappointment. Wei Wan asked curiously, "Why is sister sighing?" Wei Jiao said, "I was thinking, if I only eat pills in the future, will I not be able to eat those delicacies?" Wei Wan glared at her, then she said in a serious tone, "The essence of water and grains is only used after birth, so it's hard to avoid it being polluted. How can it compare to eating the spiritual vigor of heaven and earth? Sister is a cultivator in the future, so you must control your desires. Don't play around and enjoy life." Wei Jiao was most afraid of her lecturing, so she hugged her arm and leaned against her. She shook her body and said, all right. I'll listen to sister." At this moment, a maid came up and said, "Taoist Sun is here." Wei Wan hurriedly said, "Please come in." After a while, Sun Shao came in and raised his hand to greet them. He said, "Senior sisters, did you enjoy your stay here?" Wei Wan bowed in return and said, "Thank you for your concern, Taoist Cien. Last night, we 2 sisters had a good rest." Sun Shao smiled and said, "If it's convenient for you 2 sisters, please follow me to greet eldest senior sister." Wei Wan nodded in agreement. She gave Wei Jiao a few more serious reminders and told her what she needed to pay attention to before following Sun Shao out. After passing through a few teleportation formations, the 3 of them arrived at a cave residence. The 2 sisters walked in, and when they looked up, they saw a woman dressed in a white Taoist robe sitting beside a pond. Her long hair was tied up with a silver ring, and her eyes were as clear as water. For some reason, when the two sisters saw her for the first time, they felt a sense of reverence, but there was also a sense of closeness mixed within. Sun Shao came forward and greeted, "Greetings, senior sister." The Wei sisters also came forward and bowed, saying, "Greetings, Lu Shangzhen." They felt a little uneasy. After talking with Qiao Jing yesterday, they already understood that Lu Yenni was a direct disciple of the Tao ancestor and the eldest disciple under the Grand Elder. She was also of the same generation as the God Emperor in the heavens. Putting aside the fate of their previous lives, their statuses were worlds apart. Lu Yenni said warmly, "Junior sisters, please sit down and talk." The Wei sisters thanked her and sat down on the guest seat. Sun Shao excused himself and left the room. Lu Yenni sat down and asked a lot of questions, most of which were about the Wei sisters' past in the state of Fu. As they talked, the two sisters gradually relaxed. However, it was different from when they were facing Sun Shao. Even with Wei Jiao's carefree personality, she didn't dare to speak carelessly in front of this eldest senior sister. Lu Yenni saw that the two were uneasy. She recalled the past of the two sisters and revealed a trace of a smile. She said gently, "Senior sister will keep all the things that the two junior sisters used in the past. When the two junior sisters regain their memories, you can go and retrieve them." The two sisters didn't know why, but there was a surge of emotions in their hearts. Wei Wan stood up and bowed, saying, "Junior sister, thank you senior sister." At this moment, Wei Jiao's eyes were also slightly red. Lu Yenni sighed softly and raised her hand, saying, "Junior sister, please get up." After Wei Wan returned to her seat, she looked at the two sisters and said, "Qiao Jing has already told you about the matter of cultivation. You can stay here for now. Once you have opened your meridians, I will bring you to pay a visit to my teacher." Wei Wan bowed on her seat and said, "As you wish, senior sister." Lu Yenni gave a few more words of encouragement before letting them go. She then called Qiao Jing over and said, "The two junior sisters have returned just now and have many questions regarding cultivation. You have to help them. If there's anything you don't understand, you can ask me directly." Qiao Jing said, "Disciple understands." In the following days, the Wei sisters began to seriously cultivate. Because they'd experienced a life and death situation earlier, and they'd seen all the disciples of the White Sky Mountain estate cultivate diligently regardless of their cultivation. This had imperceptibly caused them to realize that as cultivators, only cultivation was the foundation. The Kunsher continent was originally rich in spiritium, and the White Mang Mountain was also a place where spiritium gathered. Moreover, there was no shortage of external objects for cultivation. After spending a year here, the two of them had successfully broken through and opened their meridians. At this point, they both knew that if there were no accidents, they should go to Xianyuan Heaven to pay a visit to their master, Xianyuan Tao ancestor. Chapter 1984. Half a month later, the Wei sisters' cultivation gradually stabilized. While continuing to cultivate, the two tried to learn some Taoist techniques. After all, the mountain spirit had left a deep impression on them, so they couldn't wait to learn some self-defense skills. After seeing them, Qiao Jing tactfully suggested that they didn't have to do so. The reason was that the two of them wouldn't have the opportunity to fight with others. If they really encountered an enemy, even the talismans on them would be much more useful. And when the memories of their previous bodies completely recovered, they would be able to remember everything they had learned in the past. At that time, if they still had the option to cultivate, it would be much easier with the experience left behind by their previous bodies. The Wei sisters still weren't very used to their current status. Putting aside their status as Qiao Jing's martial niece, they only knew that the latter's cultivation was far higher than theirs. So they attached great importance to this suggestion and immediately stopped. Seeing this, Qiao Jing put forward many useful suggestions one after another, appearing to be very attentive. She also had her own ideas. Right now, she was only an in-name disciple, but if she did a good job in taking care of the Wei sisters, then when they awakened the memories of their past lives, and if she could remember her good points, as long as she mentioned it in front of Lu Yeni, then she might be able to become an inner disciple. Another month passed. Just as the Wei sisters were gradually getting used to the life of cultivation, Qiao Jing received a message and said, "Martial uncles, master has ordered me to find you too." The two followed Qiao Jing out of the residence. After a few turns, they arrived at the underwater mansion. Seeing Lu Yeni sitting there, they came up to greet her. Lu Yeni first asked about the progress of the two's cultivation, and gave them a few pointers. Finally, she said, "My two junior sisters should know the reason why I called you here. This time, you have opened your meridians and broken through. You can be considered to have entered Tao. After you go down, make some small preparations. 3 days later, I will bring you to pay a visit to my master." The Wei sisters solemnly agreed and then took their leave. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. The two sisters had already made preparations and set off at dawn. They followed Qiao Jing to the outside of the underwater mansion by using the teleportation formation. The two looked over and saw Lu Yeni in her fluttering white clothes standing on the shore of the lake. They hurriedly went up to greet her. Lu Yeni said, "My two junior sisters are here. They're going to the Xianyuan heaven to escape the world-breaking heaven. I've already summoned a fellow Taoist to receive them. Just wait here for a while." Xianyuan heaven was located high above the firmament, and there were still Yuan gang wreaking havoc in the gaps between the heavens. The Wei sisters' cultivation was shallow and could not withstand such invasion, so they had to borrow strength to cross. Naturally, with Lu Yeni's magical power, she could take them to Xianyuan heaven with just a shift. But because this was the first time the two sisters were going to visit their teacher after reincarnation, they had to be a little more solemn. Moreover, traversing the heavenly world itself was beneficial to cultivators like the two sisters who had just stepped onto the path of Tao. After waiting for a short while, a huge silhouette appeared in the sky. It seemed to occupy the entire sky, but it was impossible to see what it was. Soon, the silhouette gradually became real, and its body also gradually shrunk. In the end, a 10-foot-long jade kun appeared in the sky. It slowly landed on the lake and said in a clear young girl's voice, "Yingshan greets Lu Shangzhen." Lu Yeni nodded in greeting. "Greetings, fellow Taoist." Wei Jiao looked on curiously. This was the first time she had seen a creature that could speak. Although there were humanoid creatures in the state of Fu, most of them were slaves captured after battles. As for demons, the Ji clan and divine Lord Yingxi were in the state of Fu, and almost no one dared to approach them. Therefore, she had only heard of them in the past but had never seen them. As for the White Light Water Mansion, Lu Yeni did not accept any creatures, and all the maids were human. Yingshan swayed her body and said, "Fellow Taoists, please come up. I'll take you to Xianyuan heaven." As she spoke, a spiritual light shone from her body and spread out in front of the group of people. The Wei sisters saw that Lu Yeni was the first to step up, so they followed behind her. Their minds swayed, and they found themselves in a spacious space. However, they could still see the outside world from here. Qiao Jing also came along this time. She said, "Martial uncles, we are inside the body of the Great Kun, which is another world. We can sit, lie down, and walk here without any hindrance." She had benefited from the Wei sisters this time. Otherwise, as a third-generation disciple who was not a direct descendant, she would have to cultivate to the Grotto Heaven stage to go to Xianyuan heaven. At this time, the great Kun Yingshan swayed her head and tail, and with a rumble, she broke through the heaven pass and escaped to the outside world. Wei Jiao saw that the outside world was empty. The sun, moon, stars, land, mountains, and rivers were nowhere to be seen. She asked, "Taoist Qiao, where are we?" Qiao Jing replied, reporting to Uncle Master, "The ancestral master and a few Yuan venerates arranged the heavens in order to prevent powerful foreign species from causing trouble in the outside world. This time, if we go to Xianyuan heaven according to the order, there will be a total of 36 heavens to pass through." Wei Wan asked, "Are these heavens the same as the Kunshe continent?" Qiao Jing said, "The Kunshe continent is a place of fortune. The other heavens are far inferior, but it is rumored that there are creatures living in each heaven. Wei Jiao stood on her tiptoes and looked around. But I can't see anything. At this time, a spiritual light suddenly came over and landed in front of the three, floating there motionless. The three looked at it and saw that it was a small, exquisite mirror. Qiao Jing reached out and touched it. She handed it to the two and said, "This is a spiritual mirror given to me by my master. You can use it to observe the lower world." Wei Jiao held it in her hand. After looking at it for a while, she shone it at the outside world. In an instant, the mountains, rivers, geography, and even the scenery of this world appeared in the mirror. At this moment, she suddenly saw a young elk that had just been born not long ago. It was crying out, and her eyes couldn't help but light up. She couldn't help but want to see it more clearly. With a thought, not only did the little elk become visible, even its breath could be heard clearly. With another thought, she entered the depths of the ocean. There were strange creatures everywhere. Not only that, as she became more proficient in controlling it, she found that it could be as small as a speck of dust, and as large as the sky and earth. These were things that the two of them couldn't see normally, but it greatly broadened their horizons. Although they had entered the Tao sect, their mentality had not changed. At this time, when they looked at the universe outside the world, they felt a sense of superiority, looking down on all things. Only at this moment did they truly feel that they were different from before. Cultivators should naturally transcend the mortal world, live eternally, and not be restrained by the heavens and the earth. When they thought up to here, their Tao hearts had unknowingly become slightly more perfect. At this time, Wei Jiao suddenly saw many cultivators traversing the land, hunting and killing demons everywhere. She asked, "Daoist Qiao, where is this? Why are there so many immortal disciples?" Qiao Jing took a look and said, reporting to Uncle Master, "This is the chaotic heavens. After some demons in the Kunshe continent who liked to invade and disturb the human Tao were killed, their descendants were banished here. The various sects would often send their disciples here to train and collect some bones and skin to refine treasures and pills. Uncle Master has also been here before. The demons on the Kunshe continent were all extremely powerful. In the past, only the cultivators of the Grotto Heaven could move around freely, but even so, they had to be careful to avoid some fierce monsters. However, as the divine lords in the heavens and the cultivators of the heavens continued to purge them, there were no longer any ferocious demons around the nations of human Tao, at least. Some had been killed to extinction, and most of their descendants were sent here. With the help of the mirror, Wei Jiao looked at the fierce and ferocious appearances of the demons. They were very different from the pictures she had seen in the past. Her eyes widened. So these are the fierce demons. Qiao Jing said, "When the two uncle masters reach a high level in their cultivation, they may also come here. This is a rare opportunity, why don't you take a look?" When Wei Jiao heard this, she also became serious. She no longer had the mood to play around, and carefully looked at the situation of this world. As they passed by one world after another, after an unknown period of time, the two sisters only felt a spiritual light around them. In a trance, they found that they were no longer in the body of the Yukuan, but standing on a row of clear clouds. At the same time, a voice sounded in their ears. "Xian Yuan heaven has arrived. Ying Shan will send you here." Lu Yenny said, "Thank you, Taoist friend." She flicked her sleeves, and the clouds in front of her dispersed, revealing a magnificent Taoist palace. A row of jade steps appeared under her feet, leading straight to the palace platform in front. But in the clouds and mist, it was intermittent. She turned her eyes and looked at the Wei sisters. "Junior sisters, come with me." As she spoke, she took the lead and walked forward. At this time, Wei Jiao whispered, "What do you think Master looks like?" Wei Wan said, "Sister, don't talk about Master in private." Wei Jiao nodded and obediently stopped talking. She could also see that her sister was holding her sleeves tightly at this moment. It was clear that she was also very nervous, not much worse than herself. But in her heart, there was still a faint sense of expectation and urgency. After walking on the jade steps for a long time, the three of them came in front of the Taoist palace that was illuminated by the golden rainbow clouds. Looking up, they saw the words, Qinghuan Palace, on the horizontal board. Jing Yu was already in front of the door to welcome them with a smile. He bowed and said, "Greetings, Lu Shangzhen." Then he bowed to the Wei sisters. "Greetings, Lady Wei. Master is in the palace. You can go and pay your respects." The Wei sisters couldn't help but look at Lu Yenny. The latter nodded lightly and said, "Junior sisters, go in." The two sisters sorted out their fluctuating emotions and went into the Taoist palace. Soon, they came to a large hall and saw a black-robed Taoist sitting on a praying mat. Strange phenomena appeared around him, and Xian Qi shot up to the sky. The moment they saw this scene, the two sisters trembled and stood there in a daze. There seemed to be countless familiar and strange scenes floating in front of them, and at the same time, tears flowed down uncontrollably. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Disciple, wake up." As he said this, the two sisters seemed to wake up from a deep dream, and the scenes of the past appeared in their minds. Wei Jiao's eyes were filled with tears, and she choked and said, "Master, Master, Kating finally sees you again." As she spoke, she slowly bent down and bowed deeply. Wei Wan's eyes were also red. She slowly bowed and said, "Kai Wei greets Master." Zhang Yan sighed softly and stood up from the praying mat. He personally helped them up and said in a warm voice, "Thousands of years of friendship between master and disciple. Master is also very happy to see you two return to your seats today." Chapter 1985. The Wang sisters were much older than when Sun Shao had awakened his pre-memory. They had matured earlier, and now that they had entered the Tao, they viewed the world and all living things with a detached attitude. Therefore, in just an instant, they had returned to their original state. Wang Kating wiped her tears, crying and smiling at the same time. "Master, please forgive me for being rude. I'm just too happy to see Master." Zhang Yan smiled and said warmly, "It's fine. I'm happy too." Wang Kaiwei tried her best to maintain her appearance in front of her master, but her eyes were still red. "Kaiwei is useless. Not only can I not share Master's worries, but I also make Master worry about me." Zhang Yan smiled and shook his head. "You are my disciples. How can Master let go of my worries?" Wang Kaiwei bowed again. "I haven't congratulated Master for transcending the world and enjoying the Tao." Wang Kating also bowed. "Disciple congratulates Master." Zhang Yan nodded and accepted their bow. He returned to his seat and asked the two sisters about their life experiences. With his magic power, he only needed a thought to know the past and the future, but he did not use this on his disciples. Instead, he chose to ask them personally. The Wang sisters answered one by one seriously. In the process, more memories of their predecessors were picked up bit by bit and integrated with their original selves in this world. Although they were not very old, they had more than 1,000 years of experience in their previous lives. Therefore, they quickly became the most important part. The three of them talked for half a day in the palace before the Wang sisters left. But they were not in a hurry to leave. Zhang Yan had allowed them to stay in Xianyuan heaven to cultivate for a period of time. If they had any questions in cultivation, they could come and ask him at any time. The Wang sisters knew that this was a rare opportunity and cherished it very much. Right now, although their cultivation levels were not high, their predecessors had reached the Yuanying stage. At that time, they were unable to advance any further. Naturally, they would search for a different path. Therefore, they had many questions in their hearts. Although they might not be able to use them in this life, at least they could broaden their horizons. When the two sisters walked out of the Holy Ji Palace, they saw Lu Yenny and Sun Shao standing there, looking like they were waiting for them to come out. Feeling slightly touched, they went up and bowed, saying, "Greetings, eldest senior sister." "Greetings, junior brother Fu." Lu Yenny said with a smile, "Congratulations on returning to your original state, junior sisters." Xin Shao raised his hand in greeting and said with a smile, "This little brother congratulates the two senior sisters." Wang Kating looked at him, pursed her lips into a smile, and said, "Junior martial brother, we'll have to trouble you this time. Otherwise, your senior martial sister Wei and I would have been eaten by that mountain. Senior martial sister owes you a favor." Looking at this familiar voice, Xin Shao was dazed for a moment, feeling like he had returned to the Dongxing continent. He said, "I remember when I was young in the Dongxing continent, I loved to eat the honey cakes made by senior martial sister the most. Although I have cultivated for a long time now, I can still recall the taste of that time." Wang Kating was startled, and her voice softened. "If junior martial brother likes it, senior martial sister will personally make another for you." Xin Shao smiled, "All right, then junior martial brother will wait." With his cultivation level, he naturally did not need to eat those things anymore, and he had long lost his desire for good food in the mortal world. However, this was the friendship between senior martial sister and junior martial brother, and it could not be measured by simple food. Wang Kaiwei quietly watched the two of them talk, the corners of her lips curled up slightly. At this moment, the sky outside was clear and comfortable. Under the blue sky, the endless waves of clouds could not help but make one's state of mind infinitely distant, as if they had let go of everything. After standing for a long time, Wang Kaiwei recovered and asked Lu Yenny, "Senior martial sister, how is second senior martial brother?" Lu Yenny said, "He is still sitting in seclusion." Wang Kaiwei nodded lightly. They had been husband and wife with Tian Kun in their previous lives, and they were also of the same sect, so she had asked. However, this was merely a matter of their previous life, and they would naturally not talk about it in this life. Among cultivators, the friendship between master and disciple was the highest. Between master and disciple, it was not that father and son surpassed father and son. Lu Yenny said, "The things that originally belonged to junior martial sisters are now all placed in the cave that was originally yours in Clear Darkness Water Manor. It is just that the restrictions will be changed every 12 years, and there are also spirit beasts guarding the manor outside. In a moment, I can order a disciple to accompany junior martial sisters to retrieve them." Wang Kaiwei curtsied, saying, "Thank you, senior martial sister." Lu Yenny said, "We are senior martial sisters, there is no need to say such things." Wang Kaiwei pondered for a moment, then said, "Senior martial sister, that disciple Qiao Jing treats people politely and is also capable. Why don't we let her go with us?" Lu Yenny nodded lightly, saying, "To be valued by junior martial sisters, this is her good fortune." She looked at Qiao Jing, saying, "From today onwards, you will follow at the side of the two sect uncles. Their orders are as master's orders." Qiao Jing curtsied, saying, "Disciple obeys." At this time, Lu Yenny stretched out her fair wrist, producing an intricate talisman which she handed to the Wang sisters, saying, "This was bestowed by master, and everyone in the sect has it. With it, you can go directly from the mountain and sea realm to the Kunchi continent. Junior martial sisters, please keep it well." Wang Kaiwei carefully received it, saying, "Many thanks, senior martial sister." The disciples of the Dao Palace chatted until the chimes of the bell rang out, and then said their goodbyes. Under Jing Yu's arrangements, the Wang sisters stayed in a side hall for the night. However, at this time, they still had several matters to attend to. If a cultivator were to reincarnate and step into the Dao again, then they would have to find a way to repay the karma of this life. For example, the kindness of one's parents was something that needed to be repaid the most, even serving them until the end of one's life. For example, when Tian Kun had taken him as a disciple, he had brought his mother to the sect. However, the situation of the two sisters was different. Duke Wei and his wife had passed away when they were young, and they had been raised by their aunt. Even so, they hadn't seen each other very often, and their feelings for each other weren't very deep. That was because their aunt had simply used this as a pretext to take the wealth of their father, Duke Wei, so that she could squander it freely. Fortunately, she hadn't treated the two sisters harshly, and had provided them with everything they needed. Of course, these things had originally belonged to the Wei clan. Now that the two sisters had stepped into the Dao, they naturally wouldn't think about getting these things back. In any case, their aunt had protected them, and it was impossible for two weak women to protect the family's wealth. Therefore, they had to accept this favor. After some discussion, they wrote down a deed and asked Xiao Jing to deliver it to the state of Fu. This could be considered an official gift of all the wealth to their aunt. In this way, they didn't owe each other anything. Under the arrangement of several Yuanzun, there were now realm gates in all the heavens, and there was also a teleportation formation altar on the land. Therefore, it didn't take long for Xiao Jing to come back to report. Things had been achieved as expected, but there were a few twists and turns along the way. When their aunt saw Xiao Jing, she quickly realized that the two sisters might have worshipped under some immortal family, so she didn't want to cut off this connection. Fortunately, Xiao Jing saw through her thoughts and tried to cut off her thoughts without leaving any loose ends. The Wang sisters successfully received this karma, and from then on, they had no more worries. This time, they stayed in Xianyuan heaven for a total of 3 years. Because of the recovery of their memories, all their past cultivation experience also came back, and their cultivation could be said to have advanced by leaps and bounds. On this day, after the two sisters had done their homework, Wang Kading said, "Sister, fortunately, we have built a solid foundation in this life. Coupled with superior cultivation techniques, we sisters will be able to take another step forward in the future." Wang Kaiwei also agreed with this view. In their previous lives, because of their insufficient aptitude, they couldn't practice the superior cultivation techniques, which became one of the reasons that hindered their progress. Another reason was that when they were cultivating, the spiritual opportunity of the 9 continents had already begun to decline, and there was a shortage of all kinds of external materials for cultivation. Only people with outstanding aptitude like Lu Yenni, Wei Zihong, and Yuan Jianqing could go further, or even be hindered on the road to Tao. But in this life, they were born in the Kunshe continent, a land with infinite spiritual opportunity, and had all kinds of external materials for cultivation. Coupled with what they had gained in their previous lives, they were very likely to enter the Grotto Heaven realm. However, if they wanted to go to a higher level, it would depend on their luck. Only by passing this level could they have the possibility to enjoy eternal life, otherwise there was still the possibility of reincarnation. Now, they were wholeheartedly focused on cutting off their mortal body. Even if their teacher was above them and they could open the memories of their previous lives, they didn't want to experience this again. Another month passed. The two sisters admitted that they had been staying here for too long, and that they had disturbed their teacher too much. Many of their questions had been answered, and they could now go to the lower realm to cultivate. Having made their decision, they went to the palace to bid farewell to their teacher. Zhang Yan gave them a few gentle words of advice, and then let them go. To go to the Xianyuan heaven, one had to ride the Jade Kun, but to go to the lower realm was not so troublesome. There was a grand teleportation formation in front of the palace, and with a thought, one could go to any realm. The Wang sisters and Xiao Jing used the formation to arrive in front of the clear serenity underwater palace in the mountain and sea realm. The immortals' cave they had lived in was still preserved, and no one dared to occupy it. However, because it was convenient to travel between the heavens, most of the people living in the clear serenity lake were junior disciples with shallow cultivation bases. Those who had a bit of cultivation base had gone out to establish their own immortals' cave. The two sisters didn't like to stay with a group of juniors because it was inconvenient for them and others. So, after they retrieved their things, they borrowed the talisman Lu Yenni gave them and returned to the Kunshe continent. Although they had recovered their memories, their cultivation bases had not yet recovered, so they could not go into the depths of the continent to establish their immortals' cave. They found a beautiful mountain range within the sphere of influence of the human Tao, and used the cloud dragon soul essence that Zhang Yan had given them to move water and soil, and cut into the mountain walls. Before long, they had built an exquisite temple at the peak of the mountain, which they now used to cultivate. When Xin Shao heard about this, he brought a few of his disciples to pay a visit. They stayed there for more than a month, during which time they set up many restrictive spell formations for the two sisters, and also transplanted quite a few exotic flowers and spirit trees from his own immortals' cave. One day, as the three of them were talking about the Tao, they heard the roar of a dragon coming from the sky. At the same time, the sky suddenly darkened. Xin Shao stood up and said, "Senior sisters, it must be senior brother Wei and junior brother Yuan." Chapter 1986. When the Wang sisters saw that they were from the same sect, they came out of the temple with Xin Shao to welcome them. When he reached the outer room, he saw ink clouds rolling over. Inside the clouds, a magnificent dragon carriage appeared. There were 16 ink dragons pulling the carriage at the front, and behind it, there were more than 10 cloud rafts with more than 1,000 attendants standing on them. After a while, the dragon carriage slowly landed in front of the mountain. Wei Zihong and Yuan Jianqing got off the carriage together and walked over. When they reached the temple gate, Wei Zihong came up and bowed solemnly, saying, "Greetings to the two senior sisters." Yuan Jianqing also bowed. The Wang sisters returned the greeting, saying, "Junior brother Wei greets, junior brother Yuan greets." After they greeted each other, Wang Kaiwei said, "The two junior brothers are guests from afar, please take a seat inside." Wei Zihong and Yuan Jianqing followed the Wang sisters into the main hall and sat down. After a while, maids came over to serve tea. Wei Zihong looked around and said with a smile, "The two senior sisters are setting up a new cave abode. I'm afraid there are few obedient people in the sect." This time, junior brother brought over 1,000 attendants to make it convenient for senior sisters to order around. His Yaoyin gate had many demon cultivators, but he knew that the Wang sisters rarely used demons, so the attendants they brought this time were all human. They were all from the same sect, and they were just attendants, so there was no need to be polite. Wang Kaiwei nodded and said, "Then many thanks, junior brother." Wang Kaiwei instructed, and Xiao Jing walked out. Not long later, she brought in the many attendants and quickly settled them down. Although the Wang sisters had brought over a dozen attendants from White Glow Mountain Estate, for the sake of convenience in the future, this temple was built very big from the start. A mere dozen people obviously couldn't take care of all of them, so many areas were empty. Now that there were over 1,000 people, it added a lot of liveliness. Wei Zihong said with a smile, "Just now, that martial niece seems to be eldest senior sister's disciple." Wang Kaiwei said, "Before we sisters regained our memories, this martial niece Qiao took care of us a lot. Her temperament was also not bad. Since our disciples were no longer around and there was no one nearby, we asked senior sister for her." The two sisters had taken in quite a few disciples in the past, but even the ones with the highest achievements stopped at Yuanying. Now, they were also in the process of reincarnation. Their own cultivation hadn't recovered, but they still couldn't find them. As for the disciples of the next 3 generations, they were separated by a layer, so they wouldn't bother with them anymore. At this moment, Yuan Jianqing took out a jade box and placed it on the table. He said, "This is a top-notch treasure that I collected when I was roaming the Kunshe continent. There are also some gifts from the sect over the years. I don't have any use for it now, so I believe that senior sister will have a use for it." Wang Kading gladly accepted it and said, "Thank you, Shidi." Among the sachets they retrieved, there were a lot of magic weapons that they had used in the past, but most of them were used after they had transformed their cores. Most of the magic weapons that they had used before were given to their disciples. Apart from those top-notch treasures, these gifts from the sect were just enough to make up for what they lacked. Although they wouldn't encounter any danger in the human Dao domain, and these treasures were insignificant in the face of the great restrictive formations, they couldn't just omit them. After all, you never knew what would happen in the next moment on the path of cultivation. Even a little extra help was good. Of course, if they really needed it, it wouldn't be hard for them to come by. However, gifts from the same sect couldn't be measured in this way. Moreover, the top-notch treasures had been personally gathered by Yuan Jianqing, so the significance here was naturally different. After a few words of greeting, the fellow disciples talked about what had happened after they parted, and when they talked about their memories, they couldn't help but sigh. Wei Zihong sighed. "Back in the heavenly lake of bright nether, the 9 of us cultivated together under Master's tutelage. It was such a carefree and happy life. Unfortunately, it's no longer the same as before." Yuan Jianqing said, "As long as our fellow disciples have the heart to pursue the Tao and ask for justice, then even if we're far away from each other, it'll still be right in front of us. Wang Kaiwei nodded lightly. Junior brother Yuan is right. If we can all climb to the next realm, I'm sure Master will be very happy. Sun Shao said, now that second senior brother and fifth senior brother are both in closed-door cultivation, I only hope that they can successfully pass through it. Wei Zihong couldn't help but think of Han Zhuqing at this time. He sighed. Junior brother Han is still reincarnating, and I don't know when he'll return. Among his fellow disciples, he had a good relationship with Han Zhuqing. Han Zhuqing's aptitude was decent, but due to various reasons, he had no desire to improve, which was why he was delaying his cultivation. He was very different from the Wang sisters, who had no hope after their hard work. Yuan Jianqing said, senior brother Han's juniors aren't bad. One of them has already cultivated to the Grotto Heaven realm, and another grandson has done great things under Master's tutelage. He's quite a talent. As they were talking, they heard a whistling sound from outside. It was obviously someone from Xianmen who had teleported here, but his cultivation level wasn't high. Wang Kaiwei said with concern, Marshal Niece Qiao, please go out and see which fellow Daoist has arrived. Qiao Jing accepted the order and went out. When she reached the door, she saw a handsome young cultivator standing there. His aura was quite upright, and she could tell at a glance that he was from Xianmen. She bowed and asked, fellow Daoist, where are you from? The young cultivator returned the greeting seriously and said, I'm Luchong, a disciple of Spirit Returning Sect. Master heard that the two uncle masters have returned to the sect, so he should have come to congratulate you. However, Master is currently in closed-door cultivation, so he can't come personally. Therefore, he ordered this disciple to deliver a congratulatory gift. Qiao Jing knew about Spirit Returning Sect. Although it wasn't a Xianmen sect in Donghua continent, it was still one of the sects in the 9 continents. Especially the current sect master, who was rumored to have cultivated under the ancestral master since he was young, so he could almost be regarded as a family member. She said, then please wait here, I'll go and report to the 2 uncle masters. Luchong cupped his hands and said, thank you. Qiao Jing immediately returned to the palace to report. When Wang Kaiwei heard this, she said, so it's junior apprentice brother Shen who came to congratulate us. Call that martial nephew in. Luchong was summoned to the hall after a short while. After he entered, he looked at the seat and was shocked. Since he was sent here by Shintong, his eyesight was not bad. He recognized Wei Zihong and Yuan Jianqing at a glance. These two were upper Jinren who had severed their mortal bodies. He thought that it would be difficult to see even one of them, so he didn't expect to see 2 of them here. Although the rest of them had not recovered their cultivation, they were still the direct disciples of the Daoist ancestor. In the future, they would all be able to reach the upper Jinren realm. Thinking about this, his heart was filled with respect. He bowed and said, Disciple Luchong greets the uncle masters and uncle masters. Wang Kaiwei said that he was excused and asked about Shintong's recent situation. Luchong answered all of them, then he took out a brocade box and said, this is a congratulatory gift that master asked me to bring. Wang Kaiwei nodded and ordered people to accept it. She said, when we go back, thank junior martial brother Shen for me. Luchong said yes. Wang Kaiwei asked a few more questions and asked Qiao Jing to invite him away. When Qiao Jing returned, she asked, Uncle Master, the servants are ready. Can we start the banquet? Wang Kaiwei said, all right, go ahead. Not long after plate of rare and exotic fruits were placed on the table. All of these were unique to the Kunshe continent, and they were planted by Lu Yenny in the White Radiance Mountain manor. When she saw that the Wang sisters had set up another abode, she gifted them quite a bit. These things were even beneficial to cultivators who had severed their mortal bodies. The banquet was nearing night, and the sun was setting in the west. At this moment, there were guests who came to visit. They said that they were from Qinsang school. Wang Kaiwei said, since you are from the same sect, please come in. After a while, a middle-aged Taoist with an extraordinary appearance came into the hall. He bowed to the people sitting at the table and said, I am Ran Guizhi, the guardian sent by the sect to Zhaoyuan. Greetings to the two reverends, greetings to the rest of the sect. Wang Kaiwei stood up and returned the greeting. She said politely, Jinren Ran, greetings. Do you have anything to say? Ran Guozhi said, the purple light courtyard of the sect heard that the two of you have reincarnated into Taoism. They are very happy. They specially ordered me to deliver your genealogical records, robes, and accessories to congratulate the two of you on your return to the sect. Zhang Yan's identity as Hall Master Du Jin of Qinsang School was still there. So after the Wang sisters reincarnated, they were still disciples of Qinsang School. Normally, if a disciple of a big sect like Qinsang School reincarnated, they would definitely seek out the purple light courtyard and accept their genealogical records from their previous life to correct their reputation in this world. It should be known that with the identity of a disciple of Qinsang School, they could enjoy a lot of benefits. Moreover, they could travel freely in the heavens. However, the Wang sisters were different. As the direct disciples of the Taoist ancestor, they did not care much about these things. On the contrary, it was the purple light courtyard that wanted them to correct their reputation as soon as possible. Wang Kaiwei took the genealogical records and flipped through them. Seeing that there were handwriting from her previous life on it, she could not help but recall the scene of that time. She raised her hand and gently stroked it. She sighed softly and raised her head. Jinren Ran, you personally sent this. We must be polite. Please have a seat. Ran Guozhi declined. He could tell that it was a banquet for fellow disciples of Xianyuan School. As an outsider, he did not want to be hated. After delivering the genealogical records, he had completed the task entrusted to him by the sect. There was no need for him to stay any longer. He immediately bid farewell and left. However, in the following days, the Wang sisters did not expect that many people who only had a little friendship with their previous lives would come to visit. Even if it was inconvenient for them to come, they would ask their disciples to send gifts. It seemed that they wanted to deepen their relationship with the two sisters while their cultivation was still shallow. For a while, there was an endless stream of people who came to visit. Even so, the Wang sisters did not feel that their cultivation was disturbed because most of the people were stopped by Qiao Jing. The two sisters felt that Qiao Jing was very capable. Furthermore, she was not a maid but a martial niece, so they had to treat her generously. After some discussion, the two of them summoned Qiao Jing and handed her a letter. Wang Kaiwei smiled and said, Martial nephew Qiao, this is the letter from senior sister. Take it and read it. Qiao Jing took the letter and read it. She was immediately filled with endless joy. This was personally written by Lu Yenny. It said that as long as she worked hard under the Wang sisters, when she saw this letter, she would become an official disciple of Xianyuan School. She was so excited that she could not control herself. In Qinsang School, all disciples in name were not listed in the genealogical records, so they could not be considered part of the Xianyuan School. But now that she had become an official disciple, she could go out and call herself a disciple of Xianyuan School. This meant that even if she reincarnated in the future, she could still receive guidance from her master. She had seen how the Wang sisters looked when they reincarnated. She took a deep breath and bowed deeply. She said sincerely, Thank you, martial uncles. If I am successful in my cultivation in the future, I will not forget the kindness you have shown me today.